Some debts can only be paid in blood. 3 years I've been running across highways that stretch like open wounds through the desert, through truck stops where men with hollow eyes hide from ghosts I recognize all too well. I know them because they ride shotgun with me every mile. They say time heals all wounds. They're wrong. Some wounds aren't meant to heal. They're meant to remind us of what we've lost, of what we've done, of the people we failed when they needed us most. Tonight the running stops. I can see them coming now, headlights cutting through the darkness like predators, eyes, engines growling promises of violence. They think they're hunting me. They don't understand that some men, when cornered, become more dangerous than anything hunting them. My daughter's face flashes before me one last time. Then nothing but clarity. Some say redemption is impossible. Maybe they're right. But tonight I'll settle for vengeance. The Iron Horse truck stop stood like a lone lighthouse on the edge of Interstate 80, its neon sign flickering against the approaching storm. Thunder rolled in the distance, more a promise than a threat, as clouds gathered to swallow the last remnants of twilight. Marcus Mac Sullivan sat motionless in his truck's cabin, the engine silenced hours ago. Only his weathered fingers moved, tracing the edge of a worn photograph he'd pulled from his wallet. The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m., but time had long ceased to matter to Mac. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. That was his true measure of time. The distance between the man he once was and the shell that remained. The photograph showed a girl of 16, her smile wide and genuine, her eyes reflecting the same steel-blue determination as his own. Sarah, his daughter, his everything. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in harsh white light. For a split second, Mac's face became a topography of loss. Deep valleys carved beneath his eyes, the harsh ridge of his jaw set against memories that refused to fade. Then darkness returned, bringing with it the images that haunted his every quiet moment. The screech of tires on wet asphalt, the sickening impact of metal against metal, the unbearable silence that followed. "I used to be a father," Mac whispered to the empty cabin, his voice rough from disuse. "Now I'm just a survivor." He closed his eyes, but sleep remained an elusive mercy. It had been that way since the night his world had ended, the night he'd climbed behind the wheel after too many drinks, the night Sarah had called to tell him about her diagnosis, the night everything had shattered beyond repair. The rain finally came pelting against the windshield like accusatory fingers. Mac tucked the photograph away and stepped out into the storm, letting the cold water wash over him. It never cleansed. Nothing ever did. Dawn broke reluctantly over the truck stop, painting the corrugated metal roof of the diner in muted gold. Mac entered, his tall frame stooped slightly, as if permanently braced against an invisible weight. His presence caused a momentary lull in conversation, not because anyone recognized him, but because the emptiness he carried was palpable, a warning to those who might approach. He slid into his usual booth by the window, positioned to watch the parking lot. Old habits from his military days. Always face the entrance. Always know your exits. He'd survived 3 tours with the Marines by living that way. Now it was just another meaningless routine in a life full of them. "Regular?" a voice asked, warm and lightly accented. Mac looked up, meeting Elena Rodriguez's tired eyes. 28 years old, but with an old soul's wisdom in her gaze. A gold cross hung at her neck, and a simple band still circled her ring finger, though her husband had been gone for years. Lost to a different kind of war. Mac nodded, not trusting his voice in the early hours. Elna didn't seem to mind his silence. She never had. Instead, she poured his coffee with a steady hand, the dark liquid streaming into the white ceramic mug. Steam rose between them like a veil. "You look like you haven't slept again," she said, not unkindly. "Don't need much these days," Mac replied, his voice a gravel road rarely traveled. Elena's eyes softened. "My abuela used to say that sleep is God's way of resetting the soul. Maybe yours needs the rest." Mac almost smiled at that. Almost. The corners of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of an expression, then settled back into their accustomed lines. "How's Lucia?" he asked, changing the subject. Elena's face transformed at the mention of her daughter's sorrow, temporarily eclipsed by a mother's pride. "Growing too fast. Started kindergarten last month. Already reading better than most first graders. Smart. Like her mother." The compliment fell from his lips without intent, surprising them both. Elena's cheeks colored slightly, and for a moment the weight between them shifted lighter somehow. "My Michael," she said after a pause, her fingers unconsciously touching her wedding band. "He used to write me letters from Afghanistan, said he was fighting for a future he could see in his head, us growing old together, watching Lucia graduate college someday." Mac nodded, understanding the need to speak of the dead to keep them present through words. "What about you?" Elena asked gently. "What future do you see?" Mac stared into his coffee, the black surface reflecting nothing back. "Don't look ahead much anymore." "That's no way to live, Mac." "Who said anything about living?" The words hung between them, too honest, too raw. Elena's hand moved across the table, hesitating just inches from his own. She didn't touch him. Some boundaries remained uncrossed, but the gesture itself was an offering. "Michael died protecting something he believed in," she said softly. "What are you protecting by punishing yourself?" Before Mac could answer, the diner's door swung open with enough force to rattle the windows. The morning quiet shattered as 7 men entered, their leather cuts bearing the unmistakable insignia of the Death's Head Motorcycle Club, a grinning skull wearing a German-style military helmet. Mac straightened imperceptibly, his body tensing like an old spring remembering its purpose. His eyes tracked the newcomers with cold precision, noting weapons positions, evaluating threats. The leader stepped forward, a tall man with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, his beard neatly trimmed against weathered skin. Unlike the chaotic energy of his companions, he moved with disciplined purpose. Mac recognized the military bearing immediately, one soldier identifying another across a divide of years and circumstances. This was Viper Kane, though Mac didn't yet know his name. What he saw was simply danger walking upright. Elena's posture changed as the bikers claimed a table, spreading out, as if staking territory. She moved away from Mac, her professional smile firmly in place, though her eyes had hardened. "Coffee for everyone?" she asked, her voice neutral. A heavily tattooed man with skull inked across his knuckles grabbed her wrist. "Got something stronger, sweetheart." "This is a family establishment," Elena replied, trying to pull away. "We don't serve alcohol." Skull's grip tightened. "Shame. Pretty place like this could make good money catering to the right clientele." "She said no." Mac's voice cut through the tension, not particularly loud, but carrying the unmistakable edge of command. The diner fell silent. Every head turned toward Mac's booth. Viper Kane's eyes narrowed, studying the solitary figure by the window. Recognition flickered across his features, not of Mac personally, but of the type of man he was facing. His gaze lingered on Mac's forearm, where the faded eagle globe and anchor of the Marine Corps was tattooed. "Let her go," Viper said to Skull, his voice surprisingly reasonable. "We're just having breakfast." Skull released Elena with obvious reluctance. She stepped back, rubbing her wrist, fear and defiance warring in her expression. "The lady doesn't want trouble," Max said, still seated but fully alert now. Viper walked toward Mac's booth, his movements deliberately casual. The other bikers watched, hands hovering near concealed weapons, the atmosphere electric with potential violence. "Neither do we," Viper replied, stopping a few feet from Mac's table. "Just passing through. Heard the food here was decent." Max said nothing, his eyes never leaving Viper's. "You military?" Viper asked, gesturing toward the tattoo. "Once. Iraq, Afghanistan. Both." Viper nodded, a soldier's acknowledgement. "Same. 10th Mountain Division, until they decided they didn't want me anymore." Mac remained impassive, offering no reciprocal information. Something shifted in Viper's expression, a hardening, a focusing of intent. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only Mac could hear. "I know who you are, Marcus Sullivan, and I know about your daughter." Ice flooded Mac's veins. His face remained a mask, but his hands, hidden beneath the table, curled into fists so tight the knuckles whitened. Viper straightened a smile, touching his lips that never reached his eyes. He rejoined his companions, signaling them with a slight nod. "Let's go, boys. Food probably tastes like shit anyway." The bikers rose as one, their exit as abrupt as their entrance. The last to leave, Skull, knocked a stack of menus to the floor with deliberate malice. We'll be seeing you, he called to Elena. Real soon. The door slammed behind them, leaving a vacuum of tension in their wake. The other diners slowly resumed their conversations, the incident already becoming a story to tell later. Elena approached Mac's table. Her composure recovered, but her hands still trembling slightly. Thank you, she said quietly. Mac's gaze remained fixed on the parking lot where the bikers were mounting their motorcycles. They'll be back. How do you know men like that always come back? Mac finally looked at her, his expression grave. And they knew my name. My real name. Elena's brow furrowed with concern. What does that mean? Mac didn't answer. He couldn't tell her that Viper's words had confirmed his worst fear, that his past had finally caught up with him, that the debt he'd been running from for 3 years had come due. Instead, he laid money on the table and stood. Be careful, Elena. Keep Lucia close. Mac, she called as he reached the door. Whatever trouble you're in, you don't have to face it alone. He paused, one hand on the doorframe. The morning light carved harsh lines across his face, emphasizing the isolation etched there. Some burdens can't be shared, he said finally. Some sins can't be forgiven. Tommy Bull Hayes found Mac later that evening, sitting on the hood of his truck, staring at the sunset as if expecting to find answers in the fading light. Tommy approached with the careful deliberation of a man who knew when to speak and when to listen, a rare quality in the trucking world and one that had cemented their friendship over the past 2 years. At 48, Tommy was built like his nickname suggested, broad and solid with a shaved head and a full beard that had gone gray years ago. He carried 2 bottles of beer condensation dripping down the amber glass. Thought you might need this, Tommy said, offering one to Mac. Mac shook his head. Don't drink anymore. Tommy nodded, unsurprised. He'd never seen Mac touch alcohol, though he'd never asked why. Some questions between men remained unasked, their answers too heavy for casual conversation. Heard about the trouble at Ellie's place this morning, Tommy said, leaning against the truck beside Mac. Death's Head, right? You know them. Know of them. Bad news started as returning vets with nowhere to go, turned into something uglier over time. Tommy took a long pull from his beer. Their leader, Viper Kane, he's got a reputation. Ex-military, dishonorable discharge. Story goes he lost his kid a few years back. Made him snap. Mac's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. What happened to the kid? Hit and run. Driver was never caught. Tommy glanced sideways at Mac's profile. Since then, Kane's been on a mission. Clubs into all kinds of nasty business. Drugs protection rackets worse. But Kane himself is focused on something else. Vengeance. The setting sun painted the horizon in bloody crimson, its final light reflecting in Mac's eyes like distant fires. He knew my name, Mac said quietly. My real name. Tommy set his beer down, suddenly very still. Mac, what aren't you telling me? Mac remained silent, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. Whatever it is, Tommy continued, his voice dropping low. Whatever you're running from, I need to know if it's going to bring heat down on all of us. The parking lot lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the gravel. Mac's face seemed carved from stone, ancient and immovable. 3 years ago, he finally said, I was driving through Nevada. It was raining. I'd had too much to drink. There was an accident. Tommy waited, understanding that some confessions required patience. I hit another vehicle, a family. Mac's voice grew hollow. There was a child in the car. Jesus, Tommy whispered. I didn't stop. Mac continued, each word extracted like shrapnel from an old wound. I just kept driving. Sarah was in the hospital. Terminal diagnosis. I was heading there when it happened, and I just kept going. Tommy's face remained carefully neutral, though his eyes revealed the struggle to reconcile this information with the man he'd come to know. The child, Tommy asked carefully, was it Kane's boy? Mac nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. And now he's found you? Tommy concluded, the implications settling between them like lead. Seems that way. Tommy ran a hand over his beard, thinking. You need to leave. Tonight. I'll cover your loads, make excuses. I've been running for 3 years, Tommy. And you can run for 30 more if it keeps you breathing, Tommy argued. These aren't men you can reason with. If Cain believes you killed his son, I did kill his son. Mac interrupted the admission, brutal in its simplicity. Tommy fell silent processing this. Finally, he asked, does he know about Sarah? What happened to her? Pain flashed across Mac's features, quick and devastating. He mentioned her, said he knew. Oh no, all the more reason to disappear, Tommy insisted. If he knows about Sarah, he'll use that against you. Whatever guilt you're carrying, whatever penance you think you owe, dying won't pay it. Max stared at his hands, strong and weathered, capable of violence and tenderness in equal measure. Hands that had once cradled a newborn daughter. Hands that had later gripped a steering wheel too tightly as he fled the scene of a crime. Maybe it should, he said softly. Tommy grabbed Mac's shoulder, forcing him to meet his gaze. Listen to me. Cain is dangerous. He's not just some grieving father. He's a predator who found a cause that justifies his worst instincts. If you stay, you're not just risking yourself. Elena, Lucia, everyone at this stop, they'll all be in the crossfire. Mac's expression hardened at the mention of Elena and her daughter. Tommy had found the one argument that might sway him. One night, Mac conceded. I'll leave tomorrow. Need to settle some things first. Tommy nodded, relieved but not entirely convinced. I'll put out some feelers, see what else I can learn about Cain's movements. You stay low tonight. As Tommy walked away, Mac returned his gaze to the darkening horizon. The stars were emerging now, cold and distant, offering no guidance. He reached into his pocket and withdrew Sarah's photograph, the edges soft from constant handling. I'm sorry, he whispered to her frozen smile. For everything. The night deepened around the truck stop, wrapping it in a cocoon of darkness, broken only by the scattered pools of light from security lamps. Mac lay awake in his truck's sleeping compartment, too alert for rest, too weary for action. The air conditioner hummed, masking the silence that might otherwise have driven him mad. A soft tap on his door jolted him upright, hand automatically reaching for the gun he no longer carried. Old reflexes dying hard. Mac! Elena's voice came through the metal, hushed but urgent. It's me. He opened the door to find her standing in the shadows, a small backpack clutched in her hands, her eyes wide with fear. They came to my house, she said without preamble, her voice steady despite her evident terror. The bikers, watching from across the street. I took Lucia to my sister's in town, but I was afraid to stay there. Mac's jaw tightened, anger flaring hot and bright. Get in. He helped her into the cabin, scanning the parking lot for any sign of surveillance. Nothing moved in the darkness, but that meant little. Predators were most dangerous when still. Elena sat on the edge of his bunk's shoulders, curved inward, as if to make herself smaller. In the dim light, she looked both younger and older than her 28 years. A woman carrying burdens no one should have to bear. I'm sorry, Max said, the words inadequate against the danger he'd brought to her door. This is my fault. Elena shook her head. You stood up for me. That's not something to apologize for. It is when it puts you and Lucia at risk. Mac leaned against the opposite wall, keeping distance between them. Those men, they're not after you. They're after me. Why? The question hung in the air, simple yet impossible to answer fully. Mac closed his eyes briefly, weighing how much to reveal. I did something, he said finally. Something unforgivable. The man who leads them, Viper Cain, I hurt his family. Now he wants revenge. Elena studied his face, searching for something beyond his words. Is that why you never stay anywhere long? Why you live like you're always running? Mac nodded, unable to meet her gaze. What about your daughter? Elena asked softly. Sarah, right. You mentioned her once. Does she know where you are? The pain that crossed Mac's features was answer enough. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, understanding dawning in her eyes. Oh, Mac, I'm so sorry. 3 years ago, he said the words emerging against his will, compelled by some need to confess. Cancer. She was only 16. It wasn't the full truth, not by far, but it wasn't a lie either. Sarah had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. The doctors had given her months. Mac had been on his way to the hospital when the accident happened. Drunk, devastated, his world already collapsing around him. What he couldn't tell Elena was the rest, how he'd fled the scene, how he'd reached the hospital too late, how Sarah had died alone while he hid from the consequences of his actions, how his cowardice had cost him the chance to say goodbye to his only child. Elena rose and crossed the small space between them. Before Mac could step away, she wrapped her arms around his waist, laying her head against his chest. He stood frozen, unaccustomed to human touch, to comfort freely given. "I know what it's like," she murmured against his shirt, "to lose someone and feel like half your soul went with them." Slowly, awkwardly, Mac's arms encircled her. She was warm and real and alive, and for a moment the emptiness inside him receded just enough to remember what it felt like to be human. "I can't bring Sarah back," Elena continued, her voice steady. "Just like you can't bring Michael back to me. But we're still here, Mac. Still breathing. There has to be a reason for that." Mac wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that survival could be more than punishment, that living could be more than penance. But the weight of his secrets pressed down suffocating hope before it could take root. "You should get some rest," he said, gently disengaging from her embrace. "Take the bunk. I'll keep watch." Elena looked as if she might argue, but fatigue won out. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, removing her shoes with slow, deliberate movements. "What will you do?" she asked. "About Kane and his men." "Leave," Mac answered honestly. "First light. It's better for everyone. Running again. Staying would only bring more trouble." Elena lay down, pulling the thin blanket over herself. In the confined space, her presence filled every corner, making the truck's cabin feel both smaller and somehow less empty than it had in years. "My grandmother had another saying," she murmured, sleep already softening her voice. "El que huye su destino lo persigue." What does it mean, he who flees is pursued by his destiny? Her eyes closed, her breathing growing deeper. "You can't outrun fate, Mac. Sooner or later, we all have to turn and face it." Mac settled into the driver's seat, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the windshield. Elena's words echoed in his mind, unwelcome in their truth. For 3 years he'd been running. From justice, from memory, from himself. The road had been his escape, each mile a temporary reprieve from the reckoning he knew would eventually come. Now it had found him wearing Viper Kane's face and carrying the weight of a father's grief transformed into something monstrous. Perhaps it was fitting that his punishment should come from the man whose life he destroyed. A symmetry to the suffering, a balance to the scales. As the night deepened toward dawn, Mac made a decision. He would leave as promised, but not to run. This time he would seek answers. Find out exactly what Kane knew, what he wanted beyond simple revenge. There were pieces missing, connections he couldn't see clearly. And Sarah. What had Kane meant about knowing what happened to her? The implication had haunted Mac since their encounter. Had Kane somehow discovered the truth about the accident, about Mac's flight from the scene? Or was there something else? Something Mac himself didn't know. The question burned like acid in his thoughts as he watched Elena sleep, her face peaceful in unconsciousness. He envied her that peace, knowing it would never be his again. Not in this life. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Another day. Another chance to atone or to fall further into darkness. Mac wasn't sure which path lay before him, only that he could no longer avoid the journey. Morning arrived with deceptive tranquility, the sun climbing above the horizon in a cloudless sky. Mac watched its ascent with the wary appreciation of a man who no longer took simple beauty for granted. Elena had left before first light, slipping away with a quiet thank you and a lingering touch on his arm that spoke volumes in its gentleness. Mac had watched her walk across the parking lot toward the diner, her slender figure gradually swallowed by shadow and distance. Now he stood beside his truck, checking the engine with methodical precision. A ritual performed countless times, yet never without care. The familiar tasks anchored him, providing structure when his thoughts threatened to spiral into darker territory. "So you're really leaving?" Tommy's voice came from behind him. Mac didn't turn. "Said I would." Tommy moved to stand beside him, arms crossed over his broad chest. "Talked to some contacts last night. Word is Kane's been obsessed with finding his son's killer for years. Traced the accident to a blue Peterbilt model matching yours. Been working his way through every driver who fits the description. Mac's hands stilled on the dipstick. How many before me? 3 that I know of. Tommy's expression darkened. None of them were seen again. The implication hung between them, grim and undeniable. He won't stop, Tommy continued. Not with you, not ever. Men like Cain, they need their vengeance like oxygen. Mac wiped his hands on a rag, movements deliberate and unhurried. What would you do if someone killed your child and just walked away? Tommy was silent for a long moment, considering. I'd want justice, maybe revenge. But there's a line, Mac, between justice and becoming the very thing you're punishing. Mac nodded, understanding too well the razor's edge between righteousness and damnation. He'd crossed that line 3 years ago in a moment of weakness and fear that had defined every day since. Cain crossed that line a long time ago, Tommy said. Whatever happened between you two, whatever you did, he's not just a grieving father anymore. He's something worse. A truck horn blared in the distance, the sound echoing across the lot. Mac closed the hood with a decisive thud. I appreciate the concern, he said, turning to face Tommy directly. But this isn't your fight. Made it my fight when I called you friend. Tommy held out his hand. Where you headed? Mac took the offered hand, the grip firm between them. Better you don't know. Tommy nodded, accepting this. Watch your back. These aren't the kind of men who fight fair. As Tommy walked away, Mac felt a strange sense of finality, as if some invisible thread connecting him to this place had been severed. He'd grown accustomed to leaving, had perfected the art of detachment over years of constant movement. But this departure felt different, heavier. He climbed into the cab, settling behind the wheel with the ease of long familiarity. The engine rumbled to life beneath him, a comforting vibration that had been his only constant companion through endless miles of solitude. His gaze drifted toward the diner where Elena would be serving breakfast to travelers who would forget her face the moment they returned to the highway. For a brief, irrational moment, he considered going inside, saying a proper goodbye, thanking her for the small kindnesses that had meant more than she could know. Instead, he put the truck in gear and pulled away, watching the truck stop recede in his mirrors until it was nothing more than a speck on the horizon, then gone entirely. Some goodbyes were better left unsaid. Some connections better severed clean. The open road stretched before him, a ribbon of asphalt unfurling toward an uncertain future. Mac drove with the mechanical precision of a man who had surrendered to routine, his mind elsewhere, caught between memory and dread, between what he'd done and what awaited him. Sarah's face floated in his thoughts, not as she'd been in her final days, pale and diminished by disease, but vibrant and alive, laughing at some forgotten joke. The image twisted in his chest like a knife, a reminder of all he had lost, all he had thrown away. When the attack came, it was almost a relief, a distraction from the endless loop of self-recrimination that had become his constant companion. The first indication was a flash of chrome in his side mirror. Motorcycles, 3 of them approaching fast from behind. Mac recognized the lead rider immediately, Skull Viper Cain, second in command, his face twisted in a feral grin, visible even through the mirror's reflection. Mac's military training took over his body, responding before his mind had fully processed the threat. He accelerated, putting distance between himself and his pursuers, scanning the road ahead for options. The highway cut through open desert, offering little cover and fewer escape routes. Fighting wasn't an option. Not against 3 armed men with nothing to lose. His only choice was to outrun them, to use the truck's power against their maneuverability. The bikers split formation, one pulling alongside while the others fell back. Mac caught a glimpse of a raised arm, something metallic glinting in the morning sun. Then came the sharp crack of gunfire, followed by the ping of a bullet, striking metal somewhere behind him. Mac swerved, forcing the motorcycle to drop back. His hands gripped the wheel with calculated strength, enough to maintain control, not so much that he couldn't react quickly. His breathing remained steady, his heartbeat surprisingly calm. This was familiar territory, the simplicity of survival of action and reaction without the complication of moral ambiguity. Another shot, this one punching through his side mirror in a shower of glass. Mac ducked instinctively, then straightened, eyes never leaving the road. The speedometer crept upward, 70, 75, 80 miles per hour. Dangerous speeds for a fully loaded truck, but less dangerous than the alternative. The bikers kept pace, seeming more intent on terrorizing than killing. If they'd wanted him dead, they could have shot out his tires, forced him off the road. This was something else. A message. A warning. Up ahead, the highway narrowed as it passed through a construction zone. Max saw his opportunity. He waited until the last possible moment, then hit the brakes hard, causing the truck to fishtail slightly. The bikers shot past him, momentarily confused by the sudden change in speed. Mac downshifted and accelerated again, aiming for the narrow passage between concrete barriers. The truck barely fit, scraping against the side, with a shriek of metal on concrete. Behind him, the bikers were forced to slow, funneled into single file by the constricted space. It bought him precious seconds, enough to reach for the CB radio and broadcast a distress call. "Mayday, mayday! Trucker under attack on I-80 eastbound mile marker 2 on 17. Armed bikers, shots fired. Any units in the vicinity respond." Static answered him, broken by fragments of voices too distant to be of immediate help. Max swore under his breath, focusing again on the road as he emerged from the construction zone. The brief advantage had been enough. The bikers had fallen back now, visible only as distant specks in his remaining mirror. Mac maintained his speed, unwilling to believe they'd given up so easily. His suspicion proved correct. As the highway curved around a rocky outcropping, he saw what awaited him. A roadblock. 2 pickup trucks parked horizontally across both lanes, more bikers standing beside them, weapons clearly visible. Mac had seconds to make a decision. Stopping meant death. Attempting to go around meant leaving the road, risking a rollover in the uneven terrain. Plowing through might work, but could just as easily end with him crashed and vulnerable. He chose the third option, aiming the massive truck directly at the gap between the pickups. It was barely wide enough, would require perfect timing and precision. A miscalculation of inches would be fatal. Mac's world narrowed to that single point of focus, the space between obstacles, the path to survival. Everything else fell away. Guilt, grief, the past and future. There was only now, only this moment of perfect clarity. He hit the gap at 70 miles per hour, metal screaming against metal as the truck's side scraped the pickups. The impact sent the smaller vehicles skidding sideways, bikers diving for cover as tons of steel and momentum plowed through their carefully planned trap. The truck fishtailed as it cleared the roadblock, nearly jackknifing, before Mac wrestled it back under control. In his mirror, he could see figures scrambling, some running to their vehicles, others helping those who'd been too slow to move. No pursuit followed. For now, at least, he'd escaped. Mac drove another 20 miles before pulling off at a rest area, his hands shaking with delayed adrenaline as he finally allowed himself to process what had happened. The truck's side was deeply scored, paint scraped away to reveal bare metal beneath. A bullet hole punctured the passenger door, another the shattered remains of his mirror. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the steering wheel, exhaustion washing over him in a sudden wave. Not just physical fatigue, but the bone-deep weariness of a man who had been running too long, fighting too hard with no end in sight. Kane's men had found him once. They would find him again. No matter how far he drove, how carefully he hid, the past would continue to hunt him with relentless determination. Elena's words from the night before echoed in his mind. "You can't outrun fate, Mac. Sooner or later, we all have to turn and face it." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps it was time to stop running, not to surrender, but to confront what had been chasing him these past 3 years, to finally answer for what he'd done one way or another. The decision settled over him like a physical weight, both burden and relief, an end to flight if not to fear. Max started the engine again, but instead of continuing east as planned, he made a U-turn, heading back the way he'd come. Back toward the Iron Horse truck stop. Back toward Viper Kane and whatever reckoning awaited him there. Back toward Elena, whose gentle strength had awakened something he'd thought long dead. Not hope exactly, but perhaps the memory of what hope had once felt like. As the miles unwound beneath his wheels, Mac found himself speaking aloud to the empty cabin, words meant for ears that could no longer hear them. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered, "for everything I did, everything I didn't do. I should have been there, should have faced what I'd done instead of running." The confession brought no absolution, no lightening of the weight he carried. But for the first time in 3 years, Mac felt something like resolve taking shape within him. A determination not to die well necessarily, but to at least stop living poorly. Whatever awaited him at the journey's end, he would face it standing eyes open. It was a small redemption perhaps, but the only one left to him. The Iron Horse truck stop emerged from the desert haze like a mirage, its familiar silhouette both welcome and foreboding. Mac approached cautiously, alert for any sign of Kane's men, but the parking lot held only the usual assortment of trucks and travelers' vehicles. He parked at the far edge of the lot, engine idling, as he surveyed his surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place, yet unease prickled at the base of his skull. The soldier's instinct that had saved his life more than once in combat zones halfway around the world. Something was wrong. The absence of threat felt more dangerous than its presence. Mac cut the engine and climbed down from the cab, moving with deliberate casualness toward the diner. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, heat radiating from the asphalt in shimmering waves. A few drivers nodded in greeting as he passed, familiar faces in the transient community of long haulers. The diner's interior was cool and dim after the glare outside. Mac paused in the doorway, allowing his eyes to adjust, scanning the scattered occupants with military precision. No sign of Kane or his men. No Elena either. Unease deepened to concern. Elena was always here during the lunch shift, her absence a deviation from pattern that set alarm bells ringing in Mac's mind. He approached the counter where a teenage girl with braces and a nervous smile waited to take his order. "Where's Elena?" Mac asked without preamble. The girl, Amy according to her name tag, blinked in surprise. "Ms. Rodriguez. She called in sick today. First time ever, I think." Manager was pretty upset. Mac's concern hardened into certainty. Elena never missed work, not with Lucia's school fees and her sister's medical bills depending on her income. "Has anyone been looking for her men on motorcycles?" Amy's expression shifted from confusion to wariness. "I'm not supposed to give out information about staff." "This is important," Mac interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "Elena could be in danger." The girl hesitated, conflict visible on her young face. Finally, she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "There was a guy earlier, not on a motorcycle though, suit and tie type. Asked when Elena would be in where she lived. Manager told him to leave." "What did he look like?" "Older, gray hair and a ponytail. Nice clothes, but kind of intense." Amy shivered slightly at the memory. "He left his number for her. Said it was about her daughter." Ice crystallized in Mac's veins. Viper Kane playing a different angle, using Lucia as leverage. "I need that number," Mac said, already reaching for his wallet. "And Elena's address." Amy's eyes widened. "I can't give you her address. That's like totally against policy." Mac placed a $100 bill on the counter. More money than he could afford to lose, but less than he was willing to spend to ensure Elena's safety. "Please," he said, the word unfamiliar on his tongue. "I'm trying to help her." Something in his expression must have convinced her. Amy glanced around to ensure no one was watching, then quickly scribbled an address and phone number on an order slip. "She lives in the blue house on Cedar Street," she added in a whisper. "With the porch swing. You can't miss it." Mac nodded his thanks, tucking the paper into his pocket as he turned to leave. He made it 3 steps before Tommy's massive frame blocked his path. "Thought you'd be halfway to Chicago by now," Tommy said, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp with question. "Change of plans." Tommy glanced around the diner, then gestured toward the door. "Let's talk outside." They stepped into the parking lot, moving toward the shadow of the building where they could speak privately. Tommy's expression was grim, his usual good humor nowhere in evidence. "Kane's men jumped me this morning," Mac explained before Tommy could ask. "Ambush on the highway. I got away, but they'll try again," Tommy finished for him. "So you came back here straight into the lion's den?" "Elena's missing. Called in sick today." Tommy's face darkened. "Shit. You think Kane has her, or is using Lucia to control her?" Mac ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "Either way, I need to find her. Make sure she's safe." "And then what? You can't protect her forever, Mac. Not while Kane's breathing." The implication hung between them, clear and terrible in its simplicity. "I won't become a killer," Mac said quietly. "Not again." Tommy studied him for a long moment, something like respect mingling with resignation in his gaze. "Then you'd better have another plan, because Kane won't stop until one of you is in the ground." Mac had no answer for that. No plan beyond the immediate need to ensure Elena's safety, to shield her from the consequences of his past actions. "I need to borrow your car," he said instead. "My truck's too recognizable." Tommy didn't hesitate, fishing keys from his pocket and pressing them into Mac's palm. "Old Chevy parked behind the garage. Nothing special, but it runs. I'll bring it back when I can." "You do that?" Tommy gripped Mac's shoulder, the gesture conveying everything words could not. "And Mac, whatever happens, make it count." Mac nodded, understanding the message beneath the words. This might be his last chance to set things right, to face his demons before they consumed not just him but everyone he cared about. "I will," he promised, the words carrying the weight of conviction, not just to Tommy but to himself, to Sarah's memory, to the man he had once been and might yet become again. As he walked away, Mac felt the familiar sensation of eyes on his back, the prickle of awareness that had saved his life in war zones and back alleys across the world. He turned, scanning rooftops and windows, shadows and reflections, seeking the source of his unease. Nothing moved. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet the feeling persisted, a whisper of danger on the desert wind. Somewhere someone was watching, waiting, planning. Mac continued toward Tommy's car, his stride purposeful, his senses alert. The game had changed. He was no longer prey fleeing a predator, but a soldier moving deliberately into enemy territory, not seeking death but no longer running from it either. Whatever awaited him at Elena's house, whatever trap Kane had set, Mac would face it head on. Not for redemption, which he knew was beyond his reach, but for protection. For Elena and Lucia, who deserved none of the darkness his presence had brought into their lives. It wasn't atonement. It wasn't even justice. But it was something. A stand finally taken. A debt finally acknowledged. As Mac drove away from the truck stop, the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson. It looked for all the world like blood spilled across sand, a fitting backdrop perhaps for what was to come. Retry N, okay, next part 6000. To edit, I'll now write part 2 of The Final Roar in English, with approximately 6,000 words continuing directly from where part 1 ended, following your detailed outline exactly. Tommy's Chevrolet rumbled through the outskirts of town, its aging engine protesting every acceleration with a metallic whine. Mac drove with precision, born of military training, one hand on the wheel, eyes constantly scanning mind-calculating distances and escape routes with unconscious efficiency. Cedar Street appeared on his right, a modest row of single-story homes set back from the road. Most showed signs of struggle against the desert's constant assault. Peeling paint, dust-caked windows, yards where only the hardiest plants survived. Working-class homes. Honest homes. The blue house stood out immediately, just as Amy had described. A faded porch swing hung from rusted chains, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. Bright plastic toys scattered across the small front yard told the story of a child's presence. Lucia's presence. Mac parked across the street, engine off but keys ready in the ignition. Old habits. Always prepare for quick withdrawal. The house appeared quiet. Too quiet. No movement behind curtained windows. No sound but the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Mac's unease deepened, instincts honed in combat zones, screaming warning. He approached cautiously, footsteps silent on the cracked concrete path. The porch creaked beneath his weight, despite his care, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. At the door he paused, listening. Nothing. A broken mug spread jagged ceramic shards and cold coffee across linoleum. And there on the worn countertop, an envelope, plain white, unmarked, placed with deliberate care at the center of the workspace. Mac approached slowly, scanning for traps or triggers with practiced eyes. Finding none, he opened the envelope with careful movements. Inside was a single photograph and a note written in blocky capital letters. The photograph showed Sarah, his Sarah, lying in a hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding her frail form. Mac remembered that day with perfect clarity. The day the doctors had delivered their final prognosis. Terminal. Untreatable. Weeks, perhaps, days remaining. But something was wrong with the image. It had been taken from outside the room through the window of the hospital door. A surveillance photo, not a family memento. The note beneath it read, I know what really happened to your daughter. Truck stop. Midnight. Come alone or the waitress and her kid join Sarah. Mac's hand trembled slightly, the paper crackling under his tightening grip. The implications crashed through his mind like artillery fire, deafening, disorienting. Kane knew about Sarah, had been watching her in the hospital. But how? Why? He has them, doesn't he? The voice from behind him sent Mac spinning, combat ready despite his age hands, raised defensively. Tommy stood in the kitchen doorway, his massive frame blocking the exit, expression grim beneath his gray beard. "What are you doing here?" Mac demanded, adrenaline still coursing through his system. "Following you," Tommy admitted without apology. "Figured you might need backup." Mac's posture relaxed slightly, though wariness remained in his eyes. "How'd you find this place?" "Same way you did, I imagine." "Asked around." Tommy nodded toward the note still clutched in Mac's hand. "Kane." Mac passed him the paper and photograph wordlessly. Tommy studied them, his weathered face darkening as he read. "Jesus," he muttered. "This goes deeper than I thought." "He's using Elena and Lucia as bait." Mac's voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of a soldier assessing tactical realities rather than a man confronting personal horror. "Wants to draw me out. And it's working," Tommy observed, handing the items back. "Question is why the mind games? Why not just kill you on the road this morning when he had the chance?" Max stared at the photograph of Sarah, the image blurring slightly as memories threatened to overwhelm his composure. "Because this isn't just about revenge anymore. He wants me to know why I'm dying." "What does he mean about Sarah? About what really happened?" Mac's jaw tightened, the muscles along his neck standing out like cords. "I don't know." But even as he spoke, the words doubt crept through him like poison. Sarah had died while he was on the run, hiding from the consequences of the accident that had killed Kane's son. He'd never returned to the hospital, never seen her body, never attended her funeral. His knowledge of her final hours came from medical reports requested months later after he'd begun to emerge from the fog of grief and self-loathing. What if there was more to the story? What if Kane knew something he didn't? Tommy seemed to read his thoughts. "You think there's something about Sarah's death you don't know?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Mac folded the note carefully, tucking it and the photograph into his pocket. "But I know I'm done running. If Kane wants me, he can have me. But not until Elena and Lucia are safe." "You're walking into a trap," Tommy warned. "He'll kill you the moment he sees you." "Maybe." Mac's eyes hardened, determination replacing uncertainty. "But not before I get answers." "Summer." Tommy sighed heavily, the sound of a man who recognized the immovable force of another's resolve. "What's the plan then?" Mac glanced at his watch. Hours remained before the midnight meeting. Time to prepare, to think, to plan. "First, we find out exactly who we're dealing with," he said, moving toward the door with renewed purpose. "Everything about Kane, his operations, his men. Second, we secure an extraction route for Elena and Lucia once I've got them. And third," he paused, the weight of what he was considering evident in his hesitation. "Third," Tommy prompted, "third, we even the odds, just in case talking doesn't work." Tommy nodded, understanding darkening his expression. "I know some people, old-timers who don't ask questions. Could get our hands on some insurance." Mac didn't reply immediately, the moral implications of arming himself heavy on his conscience. He'd sworn never to touch a weapon again after leaving the service, had believed that path led only to more destruction, but with Elena and Lucia's lives at stake. "Let's go," he said finally, decision made. "We've got work to do." The afternoon passed in a flurry of preparation. Tommy reached out to his network of truckers and mechanics, gathering intelligence on Kane's operation with surprising efficiency. Mac focused on mapping the truck stop and surrounding areas, identifying access points, potential cover escape routes. By evening, they had assembled in Tommy's small apartment above the garage, a sparse, functional space that reflected its owner's practical nature. Maps and hastily sketched diagrams covered the kitchen table alongside a disassembled pistol that Tommy was methodically cleaning. Death's Head runs most of the meth distribution in 3 counties. Tommy explained, hands working the gun parts with practiced ease. Started small after Kane got discharged, Just him and a few other vets. Grew into something bigger over time. How'd Kane get discharged? Mac asked, studying a satellite image of the truck stop. Bad conduct. Excessive force against civilians during his last tour in Afghanistan. Tommy reassembled the pistol with quick economical movements. Word is he was already unstable before his kid died. After that, he went full psychopath. Mac absorbed this information, adding it to his mental profile of his adversary. What about his second, the one called Skull? Morrison, former Army Ranger. Dishonorable discharge for assaulting an officer. Kane's muscle and enforcer. Tommy slid the magazine into place with a decisive click. He's the one you really need to worry about. Kane might have a personal vendetta, but Skull enjoys hurting people. Does it for fun. Mac nodded, continuing to formulate strategy. Any idea where they might be holding Elena and Lucia? My guess, the old Black Ridge Motel about 10 miles south of the truck stop. Tommy indicated a point on the map. Club uses it as a stash house, remote enough for privacy, close enough to their operations. Nikan guards. Usually 2 or 3. More tonight probably if they're expecting you. Mac traced potential approach routes with his finger mind, calculating risks and probabilities. And Kane, where will he be? At the truck stop, like the note said. He'll want to face you personally. Tommy hesitated, then added, Mac, there's something else you should know. Mac looked up, sensing the gravity in his friend's tone. Been asking around about that accident 3 years back. Tommy continued. Something doesn't add up. Reports say Kane's kid died at the scene, but I talked to an old paramedic who responded that night. Says the boy was alive when they transported him. Critical, but alive. Mac's blood ran cold. What are you saying? I'm saying the timeline's off. If the kid survived initially but was reported dead at the scene, Tommy let the implication hang in the air between them. Someone's lying. Mac finished the pieces, beginning to align in his mind. Or covering something up. Exactly. Tommy pushed a folded newspaper clipping across the table. And there's this. Mac unfolded the yellowed paper. It was an obituary for Jason Kane, age 8, loving son of Victor and Maria Kane. Died from injuries sustained in a motor vehicle accident. But the date was wrong. According to the obituary, the boy had died 3 days after the accident, not at the scene as Mac had always believed. This changes things, Mac said quietly, the weight of new possibilities settling over him. If Kane's son didn't die immediately, then maybe Sarah didn't either, Tommy finished. Maybe whatever Kane wants you to know has to do with what happened after the accident, not during it. Max stared at the obituary, mind racing. He'd fled the scene that night, driven straight to the hospital where Sarah was being treated, only to learn her condition had deteriorated drastically. By morning she was gone, her battle with cancer lost while he was hiding in a motel room, too cowardly to face the consequences of his actions. Or so he'd believed. I need to see the accident report, Mac decided. The original, not the summary I got later. Tommy nodded. I know a guy at the county records office. Owes me a favor, but it'll have to wait till morning. We don't have till morning, Mac tapped the note. Midnight. That's when Kane expects me. So what's the play? You can't just walk in there blind. Mac considered their options, weighing risks against necessities. I'll meet Kane as arranged. Keep him talking. Try to learn what he knows about Sarah. Meanwhile, you locate Elena and Lucia. Get them out. Get them somewhere safe. And leave you to face Kane and his whole crew alone. That's suicide, Mac. I don't plan on dying tonight. Mac's voice hardened with resolve. But I won't risk Elena and her daughter either. They're innocent in all this. Tommy studied his friend's face, recognizing the unmovable determination etched there. Finally, he sighed in resignation. All right, but you take this. He pushed the pistol across the table. Just in case talking doesn't work out. Max stared at the weapon memories of other guns in other hands flooding back. The weight of a service rifle during house-clearing operations, the kickback of a sidearm during firefights, the power to end lives with a twitch of his finger. After a long moment, he picked up the pistol, checking the safety, before tucking it into his waistband at the small of his back. Last resort, he said more to himself than to Tommy. Always is, Tommy agreed solemnly. Until it isn't. Night fell over the desert like a heavy blanket, stars emerging in the vast darkness above. Max sat in Tommy's Chevy a quarter-mile from the truck stop, watching headlights stream past on the highway. Each passing vehicle kicked up dust that caught in the beams, creating momentary halos before settling back to Earth. The dashboard clock read 11:37 p.m., 23 minutes until the rendezvous. Mac used the time to center himself, to prepare mind and body for what was to come. The calm before engagement, a state familiar to any combat veteran. Breath slowed, heartbeat steadied, senses heightened. The weight of the pistol pressed against his spine, a reminder of options he hoped not to use. Violence had never solved his problems, only created new ones. Tonight needed to end differently. At 11:45, he started the engine and pulled onto the highway. The truck stop appeared ahead, its lights a constellation of harsh fluorescence against the night. Even at this hour, it remained active, a waypoint for the endless flow of goods across the country, for men and women whose lives were measured in miles rather than hours. Mac parked near the garage, away from the main building. The diner's windows glowed golden, but few customers occupied the booths visible from outside. A normal night to all appearances. Yet the hairs on the back of his neck stood at attention, his combat instincts sensing the wrongness beneath the ordinary facade. Too few trucks for a weeknight, too few travelers stopping for coffee or fuel. The usual night mechanic missing from his post. Kane had cleared the playing field. Mac checked his watch. 11:55 p.m., time to move. He stepped from the car, scanning his surroundings with methodical thoroughness. The pistol remained concealed but accessible, a contingency he accepted with reluctance. His focus remained on the main building, where answers awaited. Answers about Sarah, about what had really happened 3 years ago. The diner's door chimed softly as he entered. Inside, the fluorescent lighting cast everything in harsh relief, eliminating shadows, exposing truth and flaw with equal indifference. A single waitress stood behind the counter. Not Elena, but an older woman Mac didn't recognize. Her eyes widened slightly at his entrance, then quickly lowered to the counter she was wiping with mechanical repetition. 4 men occupied a corner booth, bikers by their leather cuts and hard expressions. Death's Head members without their colors, attempting discretion, but betrayed by their bearing the watchful tension in their postures. Of Viper Kane, there was no sign. Mac approached the counter, keeping the bikers in his peripheral vision. "Coffee black," he said to the waitress, his voice neutral. She nodded wordlessly, hands trembling slightly as she poured the cup. When she slid it toward him, she leaned forward, whispering, "He's waiting in the back office. Said to send you through when you arrived." Mac nodded his thanks, leaving money on the counter. The coffee remained untouched as he moved toward the hallway marked "Employees Only." The bikers watched his progress with predatory focus, hands resting near concealed weapons. The back corridor stretched before him, dimly lit and empty. 3 doors lined the left wall, storage, restrooms, and at the end, the manager's office. Mac moved forward with measured steps, alert for any sound or movement that might signal an ambush. The office door stood slightly ajar, a thin line of light spilling into the hallway. Mac paused outside, listening. A radio played softly within. Old country music, Johnny Cash, singing about hurt and redemption. "Come in, Sullivan," a voice called from inside. "I've been waiting a long time for this meeting." Mac pushed the door open, stepping into the small office with controlled caution. Viper Kane sat behind the desk, posture relaxed, but eyes alert with dangerous intelligence. He'd exchanged his biker leather for a crisp button-down shirt and dark blazer, the costume of respectability that did nothing to disguise the predator beneath. "Where are they?" Mac demanded without preamble. Kane smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Elena and her daughter are safe, for now." He gestured to the chair opposite. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Mac remained standing. "I want proof they're alive." Kane considered him for a moment, then reached for a phone on the desk. He dialed, waited, then said simply, "Put her on." He held out the phone. Mac took it, pressing it to his ear. "Mac," Elena's voice came through, shaky but clear. "Don't come here. They'll kill you." The call ended abruptly as Kane reclaimed the phone. Satisfied, she's unharmed. The girl too. Whether they stay that way depends entirely on our conversation. Mac's jaw tightened, but he took the offered seat mine, calculating possibilities, mapping the distance to the door to Kane, to the window behind the desk. "You've been hard to find, Sullivan," Kane said conversationally, leaning back in his chair. "3 years I've been looking. 3 years of dead ends and false leads." "Could have saved yourself the trouble," Mac replied evenly. "I'm nobody, just a man trying to forget." Trying to forget? Kane's voice hardened the facade of civility, cracking slightly. "Is that what you call running from what you did? Abandoning your dying daughter to avoid facing justice?" The accusation struck with precision, finding the wound Mac had carried for years. "I never abandoned Sarah." "No." Kane opened a drawer, removing a file folder thick with documents. "Let's review the facts, shall we? 3 years ago, you were driving drunk on Route 15 outside of Henderson. You crossed the center line and struck an oncoming vehicle, a Jeep Cherokee carrying a family of 3. Max said nothing, each word another nail in the coffin of his denial. "The driver suffered minor injuries," Kane continued. "His wife a broken arm and concussion. But their son, their 8-year-old son, was critically injured. Spinal trauma, internal bleeding, head injury." Kane's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the folder. "You didn't stop, didn't call for help, just drove away, leaving a child to die alone on the asphalt." "I thought," Mac began, then stopped, the inadequacy of any explanation crushing him. "I was already on my way to the hospital. Sarah had just been diagnosed with terminal leukemia. I'd been drinking. When the accident happened, I panicked." "Panicked?" Kane repeated the word, dripping with contempt. "A decorated Marine veteran faced with the consequences of his actions, and you panicked. How convenient." Mac met Kane's gaze directly. "There's no excuse for what I did. I've lived with that knowledge every day since." "Have you?" Kane leaned forward, intensity radiating from him like heat. "Have you really lived with it? Or have you been running from it, hiding in anonymous truck stops, pretending the past couldn't find you?" The truth of the accusation landed like a physical blow. Mac had been running, not just from legal consequences, but from the moral weight of his actions, from the man he'd become in that moment of cowardice. "I'm not running anymore," Mac said quietly. "I'm here now. Do what you need to do. But let Elena and her daughter go. They're innocent." Kane studied him thoughtfully. "Noble. But I'm not interested in your surrender, Sullivan. Not yet. First, we need to establish a common understanding of what really happened." He opened the file, spreading photographs across the desk. Images of the accident scene. The crushed Jeep, the blue Peterbilt, with its damaged front-end, blood on shattered glass. "My son Jason didn't die at the scene," Kane said, his voice deceptively calm. "He was transported to Desert Springs Hospital in critical condition, the same hospital, coincidentally, where your daughter was being treated for leukemia." Mac's breath caught the connection forming in his mind with terrible clarity. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I arrived at the hospital that night, I learned the driver who'd hit us had fled. No identification, no witnesses who'd seen the driver clearly. Just a blue Peterbilt owner unknown." Kane's eyes never left Mac's face. "I also learned that my son needed emergency surgery. Surgery that required resources the hospital had limited supply of. Resources they were already using for another patient." Cold understanding washed over Mac, numbing him from the inside out. "Sarah?" he whispered. "Sarah Sullivan," Kane confirmed. 16 years old. Stage 4 leukemia. Receiving aggressive treatment that was, by all medical assessments, merely postponing the inevitable. Mac's hands curled into fists, knuckles white with tension. "What did you do?" "I did what any father would do," Kane replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness. "I made sure my son received the care he needed. I convinced the hospital administration that their resources would be better allocated to a child with a chance of survival rather than a terminal case." Horror dawned in Mac's eyes. "You had them redirect Sarah's treatment to Jason." "I made a compelling case. One doctor in particular understood the logic of it. Why waste blood products and surgical staff on a girl who would die anyway when they could save a boy with his whole life ahead of him?" Kane's expression remained impassive, recounting atrocity with bureaucratic detachment. "You killed her," Mac whispered, the truth finally breaking through 3 years of uncertainty. "You killed my daughter." "The cancer was killing her," Kane corrected coldly. "I merely accelerated the timeline." just as you accelerated my son's fate when you got behind the wheel drunk. Mac's mind reeled memories rearranging themselves into a new terrible pattern. The hospital's vague explanations about Sarah's sudden decline, the resident who couldn't quite meet his eyes when delivering the news of her death, the body already transferred to the funeral home before he could see her one last time. Why, he demanded, voice raw with grief renewed. Why tell me this now? Why not just kill me and be done with it? Kane leaned back, studying Mac with clinical detachment. Because death would be too merciful. I wanted you to know exactly what your actions cost. I wanted you to live with the knowledge that your daughter died alone because you were too much of a coward to face what you'd done. Mac's vision blurred rage and grief battling for dominance. The pistol at his back seemed to grow heavier, its presence, a gravitational pull toward violence, toward ending the man who had stolen Sarah's final hours. But there's more, Kane continued, unaware of the storm building across the desk. Something even I didn't anticipate. He withdrew a final photograph from the folder, sliding it across to Mac. It showed Jason Kane in a hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding his small form. An image chillingly similar to the one of Sarah that had been left at Elena's house. Despite everything, the redirected resources, the preferential treatment, Jason died 3 days later. His injuries were too severe. Kane's composure cracked slightly, pain bleeding through the controlled facade. All of it, what I did to your daughter, what you did to my son, it meant nothing in the end. They both died anyway. The revelation struck Mac like physical impact, driving the air from his lungs. The senselessness of it all. Lives cut short, grief, compounded vengeance without purpose, crashed through his defenses. So you see, Sullivan, Kane continued, regaining control. We're not so different, you and I. Both of us made choices that night. Both of us crossed lines we can never uncross. The only difference is I've embraced what I became. You're still pretending you can outrun it. Max stared at the photographs spread before him, evidence of twin tragedies born from a single moment of weakness. His hand moved unconsciously toward his back, toward the gun that promised simple solutions to complex moral equations. Kane noticed the movement, a smile touching his lips. Go ahead. Pull the weapon you're carrying. Shoot me. Add another death to your conscience. It won't bring Sarah back. It won't change what happened. Mac's hand stilled rational thought, reasserting itself through the haze of rage. What do you want from me? Finally, the right question. Kane collected the photographs, returning them to the folder with methodical precision. What I want is for you to suffer as I have suffered, to lose everything piece by piece until there's nothing left but the shell of who you once were. That's already happened, Mac said quietly. I lost everything the night Sarah died. Not everything, Kane contradicted. You found something new. I've watched you these past weeks, seen how you look at Elena Rodriguez, how you've started to care again, to hope again. Fresh fear coursed through Mac, colder than rage, sharper than grief. Leave her out of this. Your quarrel is with me. That's where you're wrong. My quarrel is with life itself, with the cruel joke that took my son despite everything I did to save him. Kane's eyes hardened to obsidian. Elena and her daughter are simply collateral damage, objects to be used and discarded in service to a greater purpose. And what purpose is that? Balance. Kane replied simply. You took my family. I'll take everyone you care about. Then when you have nothing left to live for, when you're begging for death as a mercy, only then will I end your miserable existence. Mac's mind raced, searching for leverage, for any way to shift the dynamic between them. Your men, do they know what you did? That you sacrificed a 16-year-old girl for nothing? Something flickered in Kane's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or concern. My men understand sacrifice. Understand doing whatever's necessary to protect your own. Do they? Mac pressed, sensing vulnerability. Or do they just follow orders without question? What would Razor Pete think about murdering an innocent girl? Kane's expression darkened. How do you know that name? I know more than you think, Mac bluffed, seizing the advantage. I know not everyone in your club agrees with how far you've gone, how personal this has become. My men are loyal, Kane snapped, the first genuine emotion breaking through his controlled exterior. To the club, maybe. To the man you were. Mac leaned forward, pressing his advantage. But the man sitting across from me now, the one who'd use a child as leverage, who'd murder a teenage girl to save his son, then murder more people when it didn't work. That's not a leader men follow willingly. That's a monster they fear. Kane's face contorted with sudden rage, control slipping like sand between fingers. You know nothing about leadership, about sacrifice. You ran when things got difficult. I stayed. I fought. I did what had to be done. You did what was easy, Mac corrected, voice steady. Hurting people is always easier than facing your own pain. I know because I tried it your way. Spent years running, hiding, blaming everyone but myself. It doesn't work, Kane. The pain follows you anyway. For a moment, something like recognition passed between them. Two men standing on opposite sides of the same abyss, viewing the same darkness from different angles. Then Kane's expression hardened once more, shutters closing over whatever humanity had briefly surfaced. Philosophical to the end, admirable but ultimately pointless. He glanced at his watch. It's after midnight. By now, Skull should be visiting Elena and her daughter. I instructed him to wait for my call before proceeding. He picked up the phone finger, hovering over the keypad. One word from me and they live. One word and they die. Their fate depends entirely on your next decision. Which is? Mac asked, though he already knew the answer. Come with me, willingly. Face what I've arranged for you without resistance. Kane's smile returned cold and clinical. In exchange, I'll order Skull to leave the woman and child unharmed. And if I refuse, then you can listen over the phone while he kills them both. Kane's finger remained poised above the keypad, the threat explicit in his posture. Your choice, Sullivan, but choose quickly. Skull isn't known for his patience. Mac weighed his options, mind racing through scenarios, calculating probabilities and outcomes with military precision. The pistol remained an option. He could draw and fire. Before Kane could dial, might even succeed in killing him. But Kane's men waited outside, and Elena would still be at Skull's mercy. How do I know you'll keep your word? Mac asked, buying time. That Elena and Lucia will be safe if I surrender. You don't, Kane admitted easily. You'll have to trust the word of a man you consider a monster. Ironic, isn't it? Mac's decision crystallized purpose, solidifying within him, like steel forged in fire. He would go with Kane, not out of surrender, but as a tactical maneuver. Tommy was out there somewhere working to locate and extract Elena and Lucia. All Mac needed to do was buy them time. All right, he said, voice steady. I'll come with you, but you call Skull first. Tell him to leave them alone. Kane studied him suspiciously, searching for deception. Finding none, he nodded once and dialed the phone. Morrison, he said when the call connected. Change of plans. Sullivan's cooperating. Leave the females for now. Return to base. He listened briefly, then added, no questions, just do it, before hanging up. Satisfied? He asked Mac. For now. Kane stood gesturing toward the door. After you, then, my men will escort us to a more private location for our final reckoning. Mac rose, hyper-aware of the pistol still concealed at his back. He could draw it now, end this before it began. But Elena's safety remained uncertain, the variables too numerous for decisive action. Instead, he preceded Kane into the hallway, mind still calculating, still seeking the path through chaos that might lead to salvation. Not for himself, but for those who remain innocent in this web of vengeance and retribution. As they emerged into the diner, the waiting bikers rose as one hand's moving to weapons. Kane raised a palm, halting them. No need for that. Mr. Sullivan has agreed to accompany us voluntarily. His tone carried unmistakable warning. He is not to be harmed. Not yet. The bikers exchanged glances, but obeyed, falling into formation around Mac as they moved toward the exit. Outside, more club members waited beside motorcycles and a black SUV with tinted windows. Mac scanned the parking lot and surrounding area, seeking any sign of Tommy or potential allies. Nothing moved in the darkness beyond the harsh fluorescent lighting. He was alone. Your chariot awaits, Kane said with mocking courtesy, indicating the SUV. I believe you're familiar with our destination, the Iron Canyon Quarry. Fitting, don't you think, a place of excavation for our final digging into the truth? Mac recognized the location. An abandoned quarry 20 miles into the desert, isolated and remote. The perfect place to make someone disappear. As he was guided toward the vehicle, a flicker of movement caught his attention. A shadow among shadows at the edge of the lot. Brief, almost imperceptible. Then gone. Tommy. It had to be. Mac kept his expression neutral, giving no indication he'd noticed anything amiss. If his friend was following, there remained hope. Not just for Elena and Lucia, but perhaps for Mac himself. He entered the SUV without resistance, Kane sliding in beside him as two bikers took the front seats. The engine rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the darkness as they pulled away from the truck stop and onto the highway. Mac leaned back against the leather seat, mind continuing its ceaseless calculation of angles and opportunities. The odds remained overwhelming, the situation dire, but he'd faced worse in combat zones across the world and survived. More importantly, he'd found something in the past 24 hours that had eluded him for 3 years' clarity. The truth about Sarah's death had ripped open wounds he'd thought scarred over, but in that pain came purpose, not vengeance. He'd seen where that path led in Kane's hollowed eyes, but justice for Sarah, for Jason, or for all who had suffered in the aftermath of one man's weakness and another's cruelty. As the SUV accelerated into the desert night, Mac felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through his chest. Not hope exactly, but its hardier cousin, resolve. He might not survive what awaited at the quarry, but he would face it standing. Would face it as the man Sarah had believed him to be, not the coward he'd become. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Sullivan was no longer running from his past. He was charging directly toward it. The Iron Canyon quarry loomed in the darkness, like an ancient wound in the earth, its terraced sides dropping away into shadow. Floodlights mounted on temporary poles cast harsh illumination across the site, creating stark contrasts of light and dark, known and unknown. The SUV came to a stop at the quarry's edge, dust billowing around it in a pale cloud. Max surveyed the scene through tinted windows, assessing threats and possibilities with trained precision. At least a dozen Death's Head members were visible, positioned strategically around the site. Some carried handguns openly, others preferred the intimacy of blades or chains. All projected the coiled readiness of men accustomed to violence. At the center of the lighted area stood a simple wooden chair, ominous in its isolation. Beside it, a metal table held items Mac couldn't identify from this distance. Tools, perhaps, or instruments designed for a more sinister purpose. "Your stage awaits," Kane said beside him, gesturing toward the chair. "I've prepared quite a performance for tonight. One might call it educational." Mac remained silent, continuing his assessment. The quarry offered few avenues for escape. Its walls too steep to climb quickly, its single-access road now blocked by motorcycles and vehicles. If Tommy was out there, his options for intervention would be severely limited. The SUV doors opened and Mac stepped out into the cool desert night. The air smelled of dust and gasoline with undertones of cigarette smoke and sweat. Men's voices carried across the open space, tense with anticipation. Kane emerged behind him, straightening his blazer with fastidious care. "Gentlemen," he called to his assembled men, "tonight we conclude business 3 years in the making. Our guest of honor has arrived." Murmurs rippled through the gathered bikers' eyes, turning to assess Mac with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. These were men bound by loyalty to Kane, by the brotherhood of shared criminality. They would follow his lead without question, execute his will without hesitation. Most of them, anyway. As Mac was marched toward the waiting chair, he spotted a familiar face among the crowd. A lean man with a scraggly beard and hollow cheeks, razor tattooed across his knuckles. Pete, the man Tommy had mentioned, the one with potential doubts about Kane's leadership. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken communication passing between them. Not alliance exactly, but recognition. Acknowledgement of something beyond the simple narrative of vengeance that had brought them to this moment. Mac filed the observation away, another variable in the complex equation of survival. "Sit," Kane ordered as they reached the chair. Mac complied, muscles tensed for action, despite his outward submission. From this position, he could better observe the items laid out on the nearby table. Rope pliers, a hunting knife, a blowtorch. Tools of interrogation, though there were no questions Kane still needed answered. These were implements of pain for pain's sake. Vengeance distilled to its most primitive form. Comfortable? Cain asked, voice dripping false concern. We wouldn't want you uncomfortable for what's to come. I've had worse seats, Mac replied evenly. Cain's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. Brave. I expected nothing less from a decorated Marine. He turned to address his assembled men. Before we begin tonight's activities, I believe some context is in order. He paced before them like a general addressing troops or perhaps a preacher before his congregation. 3 years ago, this man, Marcus Sullivan, killed my son in a drunk driving accident, fled the scene like a coward, leaving an 8-year-old boy to die alone on cold asphalt. Murmurs of anger rose from the gathered bikers, their expressions hardening with shared outrage. Cain had crafted his narrative well, Mac realized, casting himself as the grieving father, his enemies, as monsters deserving punishment. A simple story for simple men. But Cain wasn't done. For 3 years I've hunted him, tracked every lead, followed every rumor, eliminated every obstacle. His voice swelled with righteous fervor. Tonight justice will be served. Not the weak justice of courts and prisons, but true justice. Blood for blood. The men responded with grim approval, the atmosphere charging with anticipation of violence to come. Mac remained still, watching, waiting. The pistol still pressed against his spine, undetected during the cursory search Cain's men had performed. A final option, should all else fail. Before we proceed, Cain continued, reaching into his jacket. I believe our guest should see what his cowardice cost. He withdrew a photograph, the same image of Jason in the hospital that he'd shown Mac earlier. But now he displayed it to his men, passing it among them like a holy relic, fueling their collective rage. My son, Cain declared, voice breaking, with what seemed like genuine emotion. My boy, taken before his time by this man's selfish actions. The photo made its way through the crowd, each man studying it, before passing it along with increased determination. Mac watched the process with detached analysis, noting how effectively Cain manipulated his followers' emotions, directed their anger toward a single target. When the photograph reached Razor Pete, however, something unexpected happened. The lean biker studied the image not with rage but with careful attention, brow furrowing in what appeared to be confusion. He glanced from the photo to Cain, then to Mac, doubt evident in his expression. Mac registered the reaction, another piece clicking into place. There was something about the photograph, something that didn't align with the narrative Cain had constructed. Before he could pursue this thought further, Cain approached him, voice dropping to ensure only Mac could hear his next words. I visited Sarah in the hospital, you know, after I'd arranged for her treatment to be reprioritized. His eyes gleamed with malice in the harsh floodlights. She was conscious aware. I told her what was happening, why it was happening. Told her about her father's cowardice, how he'd abandoned her to save himself. Mac's muscles tensed, rage building behind his carefully maintained facade. Cain was baiting him, trying to provoke reaction to justify whatever was to follow. She cried, Cain continued, twisting the knife deeper. Called for you until the very end. Died believing you'd chosen to run rather than face what you'd done. Mac's control slipped just for an instant, hands curling into fists, jaw tightening with suppressed fury. Cain noticed satisfaction spreading across his features. There it is, he murmured. The monster beneath the mask of contrition. You're no different from me, Sullivan. Just less honest about what you are. Before Mac could respond, a commotion erupted at the perimeter of the site. Men shouted in alarm, weapons drawn as headlights appeared on the access road, an engine roaring as a vehicle approached at dangerous speed. What the hell? Cain snapped, turning toward the disturbance. Mac recognized the sound immediately. The distinctive rumble of a semi-truck at full throttle bearing down on the quarry entrance with unstoppable momentum. Tommy. The next moments unfolded in chaos. The truck crashed through the barricade of motorcycles, sending men diving for cover as machines were crushed beneath its massive wheels. Headlights swept across the quarry floor like searchlights, illuminating panicked faces and drawn weapons. Mac didn't hesitate. In the instant of maximum confusion, he surged from the chair, hand reaching behind his back for the concealed pistol. Cain turned back toward him, recognition and rage dawning simultaneously as he realized his prisoner was armed. Kill him, Kane shouted, reaching for his own weapon. Mac fired first, not at Kane but at the floodlight nearest them. The bulb exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging that section of the quarry into sudden darkness. He fired again at the next light, creating a zone of shadow, as men shouted in confusion, bullets flying wildly in response. Through the chaos, Mac caught a glimpse of Tommy in the truck's cab, expressionless behind the wheel, as he plowed through Kane's carefully arranged ambush. Elsewhere in the darkness, engines roared to life as bikers scrambled to regroup, to restore order to their shattered plan. Mac moved with purpose through the confusion, staying low, using the alternating patches of light and darkness to mask his movements. His target wasn't escape, not yet. First, he needed to find Kane, needed answers that only the Death's Head leader could provide. A figure loomed suddenly before him. Skull Morrison, Kane's enforcer, a wicked hunting knife gleaming in his hand. "Going somewhere, asshole!" Skull growled, slashing forward with practiced efficiency. Mac sidestepped, combat instincts taking over as he deflected the attack. The larger man pressed forward, blade-weaving patterns of lethal intent in the air between them. "Been looking forward to this," Skull continued, circling for advantage. "Kane wanted you alive for his games, but me, I just want you dead." Mac maintained his defensive posture, searching for an opening. "Elena and Lucia," he demanded. "Where are they?" Skull laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Worried about your little girlfriend, don't be. She's next after we finish with you." The taunt provided the opening Mac needed. As Skull lunged forward, confidence making him careless, Mac pivoted, using the larger man's momentum against him. The knife passed harmlessly by as Mac drove his elbow into Skull's exposed ribs, following with a precise strike to the throat that left the enforcer gasping. Before Skull could recover, Mac delivered a final blow, the butt of his pistol connecting with the biker's temple with controlled force. Skull collapsed unconscious but breathing. Mac relieved him of the knife before moving on, still searching for Kane amidst the chaos of the quarry. Tommy's truck had come to a stop at the center of the site, its engine still running as bikers surrounded it, weapons drawn. Of Tommy himself there was no sign, either still in the cab or moved to another position. A strategic diversion, Mac realized. Tommy had never intended to extract him, only to create enough chaos for Mac to extract himself. Movement to his right caught Mac's attention, a figure slipping away from the main group heading toward a motorcycle parked at the quarry's edge. Kane attempting to escape the collapsing situation. Mac followed, staying within the shadows, closing the distance between them with practiced stealth. Kane reached the motorcycle, hands fumbling with the ignition as he repeatedly glanced over his shoulder, fear evident in his hurried movements. "Going somewhere?" Mac asked, emerging from darkness with pistol raised. Kane froze, then slowly straightened, turning to face him. The composed veneer had cracked completely, now revealing the desperate man beneath. "Sullivan?" He acknowledged, hands raised slightly. "Impressive escape attempt. But you're still outnumbered, outgunned. My men will regroup soon enough." "By then we'll be gone," Mac replied. "But first you're going to tell me the truth, all of it." "The truth?" Kane laughed bitterly. "I already told you the truth. You killed my son. I killed your daughter. An eye for an eye, the oldest justice in the world." "No," Mac said, advancing a step. "There's more. Something about that photograph of Jason. Something that made Razor Pete look twice." Uncertainty flickered across Kane's features, quickly masked. "Pete's a sentimental fool. Always had a soft spot for children. Or maybe he recognized something I didn't," Mac pressed. "Something that doesn't fit your story." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them, heavy boots on gravel moving with purpose. Mac tensed, ready to turn his weapon toward this new threat, when a familiar voice called out. "He's lying, Mac," Tommy said, emerging from the shadows with his own pistol drawn. "About all of it." Kane's expression contorted with rage at the sight of Tommy. "You, the fat trucker, always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." "Found Elena and Lucia," Tommy continued, ignoring Kane's taunt. "They're safe, headed for the state line by now. But that's not all I found." He reached into his jacket, withdrawing a folded document. "The original accident report. The one Kane doesn't want anyone to see." Mac kept his weapon trained on Kane, who had begun to edge sideways, seeking escape. "Stand still," Mac ordered. "What does it say, Tommy?" says Jason Kane wasn't in the vehicle that night. Tommy replied, eyes never leaving Kane's face. Says the only occupants were Victor Kane and his wife Maria. No child present, no child injured. The revelation struck Mac like physical impact, momentarily robbing him of breath. What? It's a fabrication, Kane snarled. Corrupt cops covering for one of their own. Maybe, Tommy conceded. Except I also found this. He produced a second document, a death certificate for Jason Kane, dated 6 months before the accident. Leukemia, Tommy said quietly. Same as Sarah. The boy was already dead when you hit Kane's vehicle. Had been for months. Max stared at Kane, understanding dawning with terrible clarity. There was no boy in the car. You invented that part to justify what came after, to give yourself permission to become this. Kane's composure cracked entirely, his face twisting with a mixture of grief and rage. You think that matters? You still left us there? Still fled like a coward when you should have stayed, should have faced what you'd done? Yes, Mac acknowledged the simple truth heavy between them. I should have. That's on me and I'll carry it the rest of my life. But what you did to Sarah, that was never justice. It was just cruelty disguised as vengeance. She was dying anyway, Kane spat. Terminal. The doctor said so. I just hastened the inevitable. Like you've been doing ever since, Max said softly. Hastening the inevitable decay of whatever man you used to be. Something shifted in Kane's eyes. A recognition, perhaps, of how far he had fallen. For a moment, the mask of vengeance slipped, revealing the broken man beneath. A man who had lost his child to disease then constructed an elaborate mythology to channel his grief into something more manageable. Something with direction and purpose, even if that purpose was destruction. It should have been you, Kane whispered, voice raw with emotion. Why should you live when they died? Why should anyone? The question hung between them, unanswerable in its simplicity, devastating in its implications. Mac had no response, no justification for the cosmic injustice that took children while leaving their flawed fathers behind. The moment stretched taut with unresolved tension. Two damaged men facing the wreckage of lives derailed by loss and poor choices. Then Kane moved hand-darting inside his jacket with desperate speed. Mac reacted instinctively, finger tightening on the trigger, as Kane produced not a weapon, but a photograph. The image of Sarah in her hospital bed, the one he'd left at Elena's house. She asked for you? Kane said, his voice breaking. At the end. Called your name. The words landed like physical blows, driving the air from Mac's lungs. His aim wavered, grief momentarily overwhelming, tactical awareness. In that instant of vulnerability, Kane charged, tackling Mac with the full force of his desperation. They fell together, the pistol discharging harmlessly into the night sky as they grappled on the quarry floor. Kane fought with the strength of madness, all technique abandoned in a favor of raw fury. His hands found Mac's throat, squeezing with murderous intent as he straddled the larger man. Die, he hissed, spittle flying from contorted lips. Just die. Mac struggled against the stranglehold vision, dimming at the edges as oxygen deprivation took its toll. His right hand, still clutching the pistol, was pinned beneath Kane's knee. His left scrabbled for purchase for anything that might turn the tide. His fingers closed around cold metal, Skull's hunting knife fallen from his belt during the initial struggle. With fading strength, Mac brought it up, pressing the blade against Kane's side without driving it home. Enough! He gasped through constricted airways. It's over. Kane's grip only tightened, his eyes wide with manic determination. Never over. Not until you're dead. Not until everyone's dead. Mac's consciousness began to fade, darkness encroaching from all sides. In those dimming moments, Sarah's face appeared before him, not as she'd been in her final days, but vibrant and alive, smiling with the boundless optimism of youth. A choice presented itself with crystalline clarity. Kill Kane and live or die here in this quarry, another victim of grief transformed into violence. The knife remained steady against Kane's ribs, requiring only the slightest pressure to end this cycle of vengeance once and for all. Instead, Mac let it fall. Not surrender. Something else. Something harder. As consciousness slipped away, a single gunshot echoed across the quarry. Kane's grip suddenly released, his expression shifting from rage to surprise. He toppled sideways, clutching his shoulder where Tommy's bullet had struck. Mac rolled away, gasping for air, throat burning with each desperate breath. Kane lay nearby, moaning in pain but very much alive, blood seeping between the fingers pressed to his wound. Tommy approached, weapon still trained on Kane, expression grim but resolute. "It's over, Mac. Let's go." Mac struggled to his feet, retrieving his fallen pistol with shaking hands. Kane watched him through pain-glazed eyes, waiting for the killing shot he clearly expected. Instead, Mac safetied the weapon and tucked it away. "Why?" Kane demanded, voice weak but defiant. "Why not finish it?" Mac looked down at the fallen man, not with pity or forgiveness, but with the clear-eyed recognition of shared humanity, of how easily grief could transform even the best of men into monsters. "Because Sarah wouldn't want me to," he said simply, "and because Jason wouldn't want this for you either." He turned away, joining Tommy as they made their retreat across the quarry floor. Behind them, Kane's men had begun to regroup, but slowly, uncertainly. Their leader fallen, their purpose suddenly unclear. As they reached Tommy's truck, still running where he'd left it, Mac paused for a final look back. Kane remained where they'd left him, a small broken figure against the vastness of the excavated earth. "He'll come after us," Tommy warned as they climbed into the cab. "Man like that doesn't just let go." "Maybe," Mac acknowledged. "Or maybe he'll finally face what he's become." The truck rumbled to life beneath them, headlights cutting through the darkness as they pulled away from the chaos of the quarry. Mac leaned back against the seat, exhaustion washing over him in waves. "Elena and Lucia," he asked, voice rough from Kane's stranglehold. "Safe," Tommy confirmed. "Got them out before I came for you. They're with my sister in Henderson. Police protection just in case." Mac nodded, relief mingling with the physical aftermath of combat. "Thank you for everything." Tommy grunted acknowledgement, eyes fixed on the road ahead. What now? It was the question Mac had been avoiding for 3 years. What came next? What future might exist beyond the endless flight from consequences? Now, with the truth revealed and Kane's vengeance thwarted, he found himself facing it directly for the first time. "Now," he said slowly, "I stop running." The truck accelerated into the desert night, leaving the quarry and its ghost behind. Ahead lay uncertainty, potential legal consequences, the long process of rebuilding a life from the wreckage of poor choices and tragedy. But for the first time since Sarah's death, Mac felt something like peace settling over him. Not the false peace of denial or the numbing emptiness of constant motion, but the hard-won tranquility of a man who had finally turned to face his demons. Whatever came next, he would meet it standing. Retry and okay, next part 3. Edit. I'll now write part 3 of the final roar in English, with approximately 6,000 words continuing directly from where part 2 ended, following your detailed outline exactly. Dawn broke over the desert with reluctant beauty, pale light spilling across the horizon in delicate gradients of amber and rose. Mac watched its arrival through the windshield of Tommy's truck, his body aching from the previous night's confrontation, his mind still processing all that had been revealed. They had driven through the night, following back roads and unmarked trails to avoid potential pursuit. Kane's men would be searching for them, hungry for retribution after their leader's humiliation. Distance was their only advantage now. That and the element of surprise they'd seized by striking first. "Almost there," Tommy said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for miles. His voice was rough with fatigue, hands steady on the wheel despite the exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. Mac nodded, recognizing the landscape as they approached the outskirts of Henderson. The morning light revealed a small residential neighborhood, modest homes with well-tended yards, children's bicycles leaning against porches, the ordinary rhythms of life continuing unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. Tommy turned onto a tree-lined street, slowing as they approached a single-story ranch house with pale blue shutters. "My sister's place," he explained. Elena and Lucia are inside. Been there since I got them out last night." Max studied the house, assessing security with automatic precision. Decent sight lines, multiple exits, neighbors close enough to hear a disturbance. Not ideal for defense, but better than most alternatives. Kane knows you have family here, he asked. Tommy shook his head. Estranged for 15 years until recently. Reconciled after her husband died last winter. Even my closest friends don't know about her. The truck rolled to a stop in the driveway. For a moment, neither man moved the weight of their situation, settling around them like a physical presence. What's the play here, Mac? Tommy finally asked. We can't hide forever. Kane's reach is long, and his memory longer. Max stared at the house, thinking of Elena and Lucia, waiting inside. Innocent lives disrupted by his past, now inextricably bound to his uncertain future. I need to talk to Elena, he said. Explain everything. After that, he trailed off the path ahead, still unclear despite his newfound resolution to stop running. Tommy studied him with shrewd assessment. You thinking about turning yourself in, making a clean breast of it all? The question hung between them, unavoidable in its implications. The accident 3 years ago, Mac's flight from the scene, these weren't just moral failings, but legal ones, criminal ones, with consequences that couldn't be avoided forever. Been thinking about it, Mac admitted. For Elena and Lucia's sake, if nothing else, they'll never be safe as long as I'm a fugitive with Kane on my trail. Tommy nodded slowly. Won't be easy. Hit and run with injuries fleeing the scene. Statute of limitations hasn't run out. You'd be looking at time. I know. Might be worth it, though, Tommy continued thoughtfully. Clean slate afterward. No more looking over your shoulder. No more running. Mac's hand unconsciously moved to his throat where bruises from Kane's stranglehold were beginning to darken. Kane won't stop regardless. Not after last night. For him, this was never about justice. It was about having someone to blame. Someone to punish for outliving his son. Then we deal with Kane first, Tommy said with simple finality. Make sure Elena and Lucia are safe. After that, you do what you need to do with the law. The pragmatism in Tommy's voice steadied Mac, providing structure for the chaos of possibilities before him. One step at a time. First ensure safety, then seek justice, both for Kane's actions and his own. Let's go, Max said, reaching for the door handle. Elena deserves to know the truth. All of it. They approached the house together, Mac hanging back slightly to let Tommy lead. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing Tommy's sister, a heavy-set woman with the same steady eyes as her brother, her expression wary as she surveyed the newcomers. "'Bout time you showed up,' she said to Tommy, voice gruff with concern. "'Your friends inside have been climbing the walls waiting for news? Everything go okay with them?' Tommy asked. "'The little one slept some. The mother not at all.' She turned her attention to Mac, assessing him with frank curiosity. "'This him, the one all the trouble's about?' Mac met her gaze directly. "'Yes, ma'am. I apologize for bringing this to your door.' She studied him a moment longer, then stepped aside. "'Well, you look like you've been through hell, so I guess that's punishment enough for now. Come on in. Coffee's hot.' They followed her inside the house's interior, revealing lived-in comfort. Mismatched furniture arranged for conversation shelves lined with paperback novels and family photographs, the lingering scent of breakfast in the air. Elena appeared in the hallway doorway, dark circles beneath her eyes testifying to a sleepless night. At the sight of Mac, relief flooded her features quickly, followed by wariness as she registered his battered condition. "Mac," she breathed, stepping forward, but stopping short of embracing him. "You're alive." "More or less," he confirmed, the attempt at humor falling flat against the gravity of their situation. Tommy cleared his throat. "I'll give you two some privacy. Need to check the perimeter anyway, make sure we weren't followed." He retreated with his sister, leaving Mac and Elena standing in uncertain silence. Now that the moment had arrived, Mac found himself struggling to find words adequate to the task before him. How to explain 3 years of deception, cowardice, and moral failure to a woman whose good opinion had become unexpectedly vital. "You're hurt," Elena said, finally reaching toward the bruises on his neck before catching herself, hand falling back to her side. "It's nothing," Mac assured her. "Where's Lucia?" "Sleeping, finally." Elena's composure wavered slightly. "She was so scared, Mac. Those men came to the house, dragged us out in the middle of the night. My baby." Her voice broke, eyes welling with tears she'd likely been holding back for Lucia's sake. Mac's chest tightened with guilt. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. All of it." You and Lucia got caught in something that should have been between Kane and me. Tommy told me some of it, Elena said, regaining control. About the accident 3 years ago. About what this man Kane believes you did to his family. Did he tell you that Kane was lying? That there was no child in the car that night? Elena's eyes widened slightly. No, he just said it was complicated. That you'd explain when you arrived. Mac nodded, steeling himself for the full confession. We should sit down. It's a long story, and not a pretty one. They moved to the living room, settling on opposite ends of a worn sofa. Mac gathered his thoughts, organizing the tangled threads of the past into some semblance of coherent narrative. 3 years ago, he began. My daughter Sarah was diagnosed with leukemia. Terminal. Doctors gave her months at best. The familiar pain rose in his chest, duller now, but never absent. I didn't handle it well. Started drinking. One night I got a call from the hospital. Sarah had taken a turn for the worse. I was drunk, but I drove anyway. Needed to see her. Elena listened silently, her dark eyes reflecting compassion without judgment. There was an accident, Mac continued. Rainy night, poor visibility. I crossed the center line, struck another vehicle. A man and woman inside, Victor and Maria Kane. They were injured, not critically. But I didn't stop, just kept driving to the hospital, telling myself Sarah needed me more than they did. He paused, the shame of that moment as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. By the time I reached the hospital, Sarah had deteriorated further. The doctors were giving her blood products, preparing for emergency intervention. I waited in the hallway, too drunk and guilty to face her. And then, Mac's hands clenched involuntarily, knuckles whitening, as he forced himself to continue. Kane arrived at the same hospital. His injuries were being treated, and somehow he learned that the blue truck that hit him belonged to a man whose daughter was a patient there. He convinced the hospital administration to redirect Sarah's treatment resources to his own care. Said it was wasteful to use them on a terminal case when they could save someone with better prospects. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, horror dawning in her eyes. They listened to him. They just stopped treating your daughter. Sarah died that night. Mac confirmed, the voice hollow with the memory. I didn't know why at the time, just that her condition had suddenly worsened. I was devastated, ashamed of the accident, afraid of facing charges while grieving Sarah. So I ran. Left town, changed my name, became a long-haul trucker to stay in constant motion. He met Elena's gaze directly, needing her to understand the next part. What I didn't know, what I only learned last night, was that Kane fabricated a story about his son dying in the accident. The boy had actually died months earlier from leukemia, the same disease that took Sarah. Dios mío, Elena whispered, the pieces aligning in her mind. So all this time he's been hunting you for killing a child who wasn't even there. Kane needed someone to blame, Max said quietly, for his son's death, for his own pain. I was convenient. A genuine sinner, if not the one he claimed I was. Elena was silent for a long moment, absorbing the tangled tragedy of it all. Mac waited, prepared for her condemnation, her disgust at the cowardice that had defined his actions 3 years ago. Instead, she reached across the space between them, taking his hand in hers. What happened to Sarah wasn't your fault, Mac. Kane is the monster in this story, not you. I still left the scene of an accident, Mac reminded her. Still abandoned my responsibilities out of fear. Still spent 3 years running instead of facing what I'd done. And now, Elena asked, her fingers warm against his. What will you do now? Before Mac could answer, Tommy appeared in the doorway, expression grave. Hate to interrupt, but we've got trouble. Just got word from a contact at the truck stop. Kane's men are gearing up. Sounds like they're planning something big. Mac rose immediately, instincts shifting to combat readiness. Details. Gathering weapons, making calls to pull in members from other chapters. One of the mechanics overheard Skull talking about burning it all down, whatever that means. It means Kane's done playing games, Mac translated grimly. He's moving to full-scale retaliation. Elena stood as well, fear evident in her expression, but determination in her posture. What do we do? Run again. Mac shook his head, decision, crystallizing with sudden clarity. No more running. Not for any of us. He turned to Tommy. How many men can you gather, truckers, mechanics? People you trust. Tommy considered briefly. Dozen, maybe. Guys who've had run-ins with Kane's crew before would welcome a chance to push back. Why? Because we're going to end this, Max said, voice hardening with resolve. Not by running, not by hiding, by taking the fight to Kane directly. You're talking about a war, Tommy said cautiously, against an organized motorcycle club with weapons and nothing to lose. I'm talking about standing ground, Mac corrected, setting a trap instead of waiting to be hunted. Kane expects us to run to stay defensive. We do the opposite. Elena's grip on his hand tightened. Mac, this is crazy. These men are killers. You can't just... We can't keep running either, Mac interrupted gently. Not you and Lucia, not me, not anyone Kane decides is connected to me. He won't stop until he's dealt with directly. A small voice from the hallway interrupted their discussion. Mommy? All three adults turned to see Lucia standing in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes wide with confusion and lingering fear. Elena immediately went to her, kneeling to embrace her daughter with fierce protectiveness. It's okay, mija, she murmured, smoothing the child's hair. Everything's okay. Lucia looked past her mother to where Mac stood, recognition dawning in her young face. Mr. Mac, the truck man. Despite the gravity of the situation, Mac felt a smile tug at his lips. That's right, Lucia, the truck man. Are you helping us hide from the bad men? She asked with the direct simplicity of childhood. Mac crossed to where they stood, kneeling to meet Lucia at eye level. Yes, he said, matching her seriousness. I'm going to make sure the bad men can't scare you anymore. But I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that? The child nodded solemnly, a miniature version of her mother's determination in her expression. I'm already being brave. Mommy said so. She's right. Mac agreed, something shifting in his chest at the trust in Lucia's eyes. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. Elena gathered her daughter closer, meeting Mac's gaze over the child's head. In her eyes, he saw understanding dawning, not just of his plan, but of the deeper truth beneath it. This wasn't merely about standing ground or ending a vendetta. It was about protecting what mattered, about finally becoming the man Sarah had believed him to be. What do you need us to do? Elena asked quietly. Max straightened, turning to include Tommy in the conversation. First, we get you and Lucia somewhere truly secure. Not just hidden, but protected. Then we prepare. Kane thinks he's bringing war to us. Instead, we'll be waiting for him. Tommy nodded, understanding the shift in strategy. The truck stop. It's where he'll expect to find us, where he'll focus his attack. Exactly, Mac confirmed. But we'll be ready. On our terms, with our people in position. It's still dangerous as hell, Tommy pointed out. Even with preparation, even with numbers on our side, these aren't amateurs we're dealing with. No, Mac agreed, his expression hardening. They're predators who've gone unchallenged too long, who believe they can terrorize and harm with impunity. That ends tonight. The declaration hung in the air, its implications settling around them like a physical weight. They were committing to direct confrontation with men who killed without remorse, who operated outside the boundaries of law and conscience. Yet in that moment of decision, Mac felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Clarity. The fog of guilt and uncertainty that had clouded his existence since Sarah's death was lifting, burned away by the simple, incontrovertible need to protect those now depending on him. Not redemption. He remained clear-eyed about the impossibility of that, but perhaps something equally valuable: purpose. All right, Tommy said after a moment, acceptance in his tone. Let's plan this properly. No half measures, no improvisations. If we're making a stand, we do it right. Mac nodded, already mentally outlining strategy, contingencies, resource requirements. First priority is securing Elena and Lucia. Any ideas? My ex-brother-in-law's a sheriff's deputy, 2 counties over, Tommy offered. Not in Kane's pocket, owes me for helping his kid through some trouble last year. Could arrange protective custody off the books. Will he ask questions? Mac inquired, conscious of the legal complications still hovering in the background. Not the kind we can't answer, Tommy assured him. He's a good man, understands sometimes the law needs supplementing. Mac turned to Elena, who still held Lucia close against her side. It's your decision. I can't ask you to trust strangers, not after everything that's happened. Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for something only she could define. Whatever she sought, she seemed to find it her expression resolving into determined acceptance. "We'll go," she said finally. "But Mac, promise me something. Anything. Promise you'll still be alive when this is over." Her voice held no sentimentality, only practical concern. "Lucia's lost one good man in her life already. She doesn't need to lose another." The simplicity of the request, the implicit acknowledgement of his place in their lives, struck Mac with unexpected force. He'd grown so accustomed to solitude, to the absence of meaningful connection, that Elena's words fell like rain on parched earth. "I promise," he said. The commitment weighted with more than just survival. It was a promise to remain, to cease running, to face whatever came next, good or bad, with steadfast presence. Tommy cleared his throat, breaking the moment with practical concerns. "I'll make the call to Rick and get the protection arranged. Mac, you start thinking strategy. We'll need every advantage we can create." As Tommy moved toward the kitchen to use the phone, Elena guided Lucia back toward the bedroom to gather their things. Mac remained in the living room, mind-shifting into tactical analysis, the soldier emerging from beneath years of self-imposed exile. The Iron Horse truck stop spread through his memory in detailed relief, its layout, vulnerabilities, defensive possibilities. Kane would come in force, expecting to overwhelm through superior numbers and firepower. The key would be preparation, positioning, and most importantly, disrupting Kane's expectations. By the time Tommy returned, Mac had the beginnings of a plan forming. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Rick's on board," Tommy confirmed. "Will meet us at a safe house near Lake Mead in 2 hours. Place is isolated, defensible, off official records. Elena and Lucia will be secure there." "Good." Mac gestured toward the coffee table where he'd sketched a rough map of the truck stop. "Here's what I'm thinking. Kane expects to find us scrambling, disorganized, possibly still in hiding. Instead, we'll have positions prepared, fields of fire, established escape routes secured." Tommy studied the diagram, professional assessment in his gaze. "You're talking military-style defense. Most of our guys are truckers, Mac, not soldiers." "They don't need to be soldiers," Mac explained. "Just determined, positioned correctly, and given clear instructions. Kane's advantage has always been fear, people too intimidated to stand against him. Remove that, add the element of surprise, and the equation changes dramatically." Tommy nodded slowly, beginning to see the possibilities. "Could work, especially if we can get Kane separated from his men, force him to face consequences directly, rather than hiding behind Skull and the others." "Exactly." Mac tapped a specific point on the diagram. "The garage. Isolated, controlled environment, multiple exits but easily monitored. If we can maneuver Kane there while keeping his men occupied elsewhere, we can end this without a full-scale bloodbath." Tommy finished, approval evident in his tone. "Smart, very smart. It's still dangerous," Mac cautioned. "Still requires everything to go exactly right. And even then, some of us might not walk away," Tommy acknowledged soberly. "Nature of the beast when facing men like Kane." The truth of this settled between them, the cold calculation of potential sacrifice against necessary action. Mac had made such calculations before in war zones where abstract strategy translated to real lives lost and saved. The weight of responsibility never lessened, never became routine. "I should be the one in the garage," Mac said after a moment. "The one to face Kane directly. This began between us. It should end the same way." Tommy studied him with shrewd assessment. "You sure about that? After last night, he'll be out for blood, Mac. No restraint, no mercy." "I'm counting on it," Mac replied grimly. "His rage makes him vulnerable, makes him careless, and I need that advantage." Further discussion was interrupted by Elena's return, Lucia at her side. Both had changed clothes, packed small bags, preparing for uncertainty with pragmatic efficiency. "We're ready," Elena announced, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. Only the tightness around her eyes betrayed the fear she kept carefully contained for her daughter's sake. Mac crossed to them, kneeling once more to address Lucia directly. "You're going on a special trip with your mom," he explained, "with a police officer who's going to make sure you're extra safe, like a secret mission." "Okay." Lucia nodded, solemn understanding in her young face. "Will you come too?" "Not right away," Mac answered honestly. I have to take care of something important first. But afterward, Icreda, he glanced up at Elena seeking confirmation before making promises he might not be able to keep. She nodded slightly, permission granted. Afterward, Mac continued, returning his attention to Lucia. I'll come find you, and maybe we can all get ice cream together. Would you like that? Lucia's expression brightened slightly at the prospect. Chocolate with sprinkles. Any kind you want. Mac promised the simple normalcy of the conversation, a stark contrast to the dangers that necessitated it. He straightened, meeting Elena's gaze directly. Tommy will take you to the safe house. I need to get to the truck stop, start preparations. Shouldn't we stay together? Elena questioned, concern evident in her voice. Different targets, different directions, Mac explained. Safer that way. If Kane's men are watching, they'll have a harder time tracking both movements. Elena accepted this with reluctant understanding. When will we see you again? The question held more than logistics. It carried the weight of possibility of a future beyond the immediate crisis. Mac felt its significance settle into the spaces between his heartbeats. Soon, he answered the word both promise and hope. When this is finished, one way or another. Elena stepped forward, then closing the distance between them. Before Mac could react, she raised on tiptoes, pressing a brief kiss to his cheek. The contact gentle but laden with unspoken meaning. Be careful, she whispered, close enough that her breath warmed his skin. Remember your promise. Mac nodded temporarily, wordless, the unexpected tenderness of the gesture catching him off guard. Then Elena was moving away, guiding Lucia toward the door, where Tommy waited with car keys in hand. I'll get them settled, then meet you at the stop, Tommy said. 2 hours maximum. I'll be ready, Mac assured him. Tell Rick. Tell him thank you, from both of us. Tommy nodded, understanding the deeper gratitude beneath the simple words. Then they were gone, Elena casting one final glance over her shoulder before the door closed behind them. Mac stood alone in the quiet house, the weight of what lay ahead settling around his shoulders like a familiar burden. Not the crushing weight of guilt and regret that had defined the past 3 years, but the clean, honest weight of responsibility accepted. Of necessary action, embraced without reservation. For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus Sullivan felt fully present in his own life, not running from the past or hiding from the future, but standing firmly in the moment, facing what came with clear eyes and steady resolve. It was time to end this, once and for all. The Iron Horse truck stop appeared unchanged as Mac approached the familiar landscape of diesel pumps, weathered buildings, and parked semis, presenting an illusion of normalcy. But beneath the ordinary facade, tension hummed like electrical current, invisible but unmistakable. Mac had borrowed Tommy's sister's car, an unremarkable sedan that attracted no attention, as he pulled into the far corner of the lot. From this vantage point, he could observe without being immediately noticed, watching the patterns of movement identifying Kane's surveillance. They were there as expected. 2 bikers positioned casually near the garage, another lounging by the diner entrance. Not wearing colors, attempting discretion, but betrayed by their watchful postures and constant communication via cell phones. Mac used the time to refine his mental map of the area, cataloging changes since his last visit, noting potential cover and fields of fire. The garage remained central to his strategy, a controlled environment with limited access points somewhere Kane could be isolated from his support. By late afternoon, the preparations were well underway. Truckers loyal to Tommy had begun arriving. Not all at once, but in staggered intervals, their presence unremarkable in the normal flow of the stop. Each was briefed, individually positioned, strategically equipped as circumstances allowed. These weren't soldiers, as Tommy had pointed out, but they weren't helpless civilians either. Long-haul truckers lived in a world with its own dangers, its own codes of survival. Many were veterans themselves, men who'd traded military service for the relative freedom of the open road. They understood what was at stake. Not just Mac's personal vendetta, but the broader principle of standing against predators who'd claimed their territory unopposed for too long. Tommy arrived as promised, bringing additional supplies, and the welcome news that Elena and Lucia were safely ensconced in protective custody. Rick's got them at the lake house, he confirmed, joining Mac in the garage where they had established their command center. 2 deputies he trusts with him. Kane would need an army to get near them. Mac nodded, relief evident in the slight easing of tension around his eyes. Good. One less vulnerability to worry about. How many men have we got? Tommy asked, surveying the garage with tactical assessment. 17, including us, Mac replied. Positioned throughout the stop, communicating via the CB system. Kane's watchers have noticed some of the activity, but not its purpose. They're reporting increased traffic, nothing more. And Kane himself, no sign yet, but Skull's been spotted. Drove through about an hour ago checking the perimeter. They're planning something for tonight. I can feel it. Tommy nodded, familiar enough with combat instincts to respect their validity. What's our timeline? Dusk, Mac decided. When visibility starts to fade. We'll make contact, then draw them in on our terms. The afternoon passed with meticulous preparation. Positions refined, contingencies established, responsibilities assigned. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the truck stop, Mac felt the familiar calm of pre-engagement settling over him, the clarity of purpose, the sharpening of senses, the narrowing of focus to essential details. He'd positioned himself in the garage as planned, a solitary figure amid the tools and equipment of mechanical repair. Tommy coordinated the outer defenses, ensuring their makeshift force understood their roles in the coming confrontation. The radio at Mac's side crackled to life. Movement on the south approach, came a trucker's voice, tense but controlled. Multiple motorcycles, at least 15. Moving in formation. Copy that, Mac responded. Maintain positions. Let them enter the perimeter. Another voice joined the channel. Second group approaching from the east. Vehicles, not bikes. Black SUVs like the one from last night. Kane's bringing everyone, Tommy commented from his position near the diner. Full show of force. Mac absorbed this information with tactical calculation. Good. Means he's committed all in. Harder to retreat, harder to regroup if things go wrong for them. The sun touched the horizon, the sky bleeding crimson and gold as day surrendered to dusk. In that transition light, the Death's Head forces arrived. Motorcycles rumbling into the lot from multiple directions, SUVs positioning to block the main exits. A show of strength, a message of intimidation. Mac watched through the garage windows as Kane emerged from the lead vehicle, his right arm in a sling from Tommy's bullet. The previous night, his face set in lines of cold determination. Skull flanked him immediately, a human shield against potential threats. I count 23 hostiles, Tommy reported over the radio. Armed, not bothering to conceal it. They think they've got us cornered. Let them think it, Mac replied. Hold positions until they commit. The Death's Head members spread throughout the truck stop, checking buildings, clearing spaces with military precision. Normal customers had long since departed, warned discreetly by Tommy's people as the preparations advanced. Now only combatants remained, two forces poised for confrontation across the asphalt battlefield. Kane's voice suddenly boomed across the parking lot, amplified by a handheld megaphone. Sullivan, I know you're here. No more running. No more hiding. Face me like a man, or I start burning this place to the ground with everyone inside. Mac took a deep breath, centering himself for what was to come. Tommy, you copy. Loud and clear, came the immediate response. I'm moving to phase 2. Get ready. Be careful in there, Mac. Kane's not thinking straight anymore. Man's got nothing left to lose. That makes 2 of us, Mac replied grimly, setting down the radio. He moved to the garage's front entrance, positioning himself where he would be visible from the parking lot. When he stepped into the fading light, a ripple of reaction passed through Kane's assembled forces. Men reaching for weapons, Skull moving protectively closer to his leader. Kane himself seemed momentarily startled by Mac's willingness to appear to face him directly without apparent fear. The megaphone lowered slightly before raising again to his lips. Brave Sullivan, stupid but brave. Shiri. Mac's voice carried across the distance between them, pitched to project without shouting. This ends tonight, Kane. One way or another. On that we agree, Kane replied, something like satisfaction in his tone. Though I suspect we have different outcomes in mind. Call off your men, Mac continued. This is between us, has been from the beginning. Kane laughed, the sound harsh through the megaphone's distortion. Noble to the end, but I'm done playing by your rules. You had your chance for a clean death last night. Now it gets messy, he gestured to his assembled forces. Burn it all. The bikers moved with practiced coordination, producing Molotov cocktails from saddlebags, lighters flaring in the gathering darkness. The first firebomb sailed through the air, shattering against the diner's outer wall flames, spreading in a violent bloom of orange and yellow. "Now, Tommy," Max spoke into his handheld radio voice, calm despite the escalating chaos. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From positions carefully established throughout the truck stop, Tommy's forces emerged, not charging headlong into conflict, but establishing a coordinated defensive perimeter. Fire extinguishers deployed against the spreading flames, while others took cover behind vehicles and structures, creating a stalemate of positioned forces. Kane's expression shifted from confidence to confusion, then to rage as he realized the trap they'd walked into. "Kill them!" he screamed, megaphone forgotten in his fury. "Kill them all!" The first gunshot shattered the night's relative quiet, bullets pinging against metal and concrete as both sides sought cover. Mac ducked back into the garage doorway, protected from the initial exchange, while maintaining visual contact with the battlefield. Through the chaos, he tracked Kane's movement, watched as the Death's Head leader retreated toward one of the SUVs, Skull covering his withdrawal with suppressing fire. "Kane's pulling back," Mac reported into the radio. "Southeast corner, Black Escalade." "On it," Tommy responded. "Plan's working, Mac. They're split, disorganized. Didn't expect resistance." Indeed, the coordinated defense had thrown Kane's forces into disarray. Accustomed to intimidating through superior aggression, they found themselves facing determined opposition from multiple angles, their advantage of numbers neutralized by poor positioning and surprise. Mac moved deeper into the garage, navigating between lifts and tool cabinets toward the rear exit. If his assessment of Kane was correct, the Death's Head leader would seek to re-establish control, to find a position from which to direct his forces more effectively. The garage's back door led to a narrow service alley that connected to the main lot, a potential route for Kane to access the building's defensive potential. Mac positioned himself there, waiting in the shadows, pistol drawn but held low against his leg. Minutes passed, the sounds of conflict ebbing and flowing across the truck stop. The radio at Mac's belt provided updates. Tommy coordinating their defenders, adjusting positions as Kane's forces regrouped for secondary assaults. Then footsteps in the alley, cautious, measured. Two sets approaching from the south. "This is insane," a voice hissed. Not Kane's, but Skull's. "We need to pull back, regroup. They were waiting for us." "We are not retreating," came Kane's reply, tension vibrating through each word. "Sullivan's in there. I can feel it. This ends tonight, just like he said." "At what cost?" Skull demanded, unexpected reason in his tone. "We've got men down already. Police will be here soon. Someone must have heard the shots." "Since when are you afraid of local cops?" Kane sneered. "They're on our payroll, remember. County cops, sure. But this kind of firefight brings state response, maybe even feds. Kane, this isn't worth it. The guy's nobody, just some trucker you've built into a monster in your head." The assessment, so accurate in its simplicity, seemed to enrage Kane further. "He killed my son." A moment of silence followed, heavy with unspoken tension. Then Skull's voice, lower but clearly audible in the alley's acoustics. "Did he? Because I've been hearing things, Kane. Things about Jason dying before the accident, about hospital records being altered." Mac tensed, recognizing the pivotal moment unfolding. Kane's carefully constructed narrative was unraveling his authority with it. "Who told you that?" Kane demanded, voice dangerous in its quiet intensity. "Who's been spreading lies about my boy?" "Does it matter?" Skull countered. "Is it true? Have we been hunting this guy, hurting innocent people, over something that never happened?" The sound of movement followed. A scuffle, bodies colliding against the alley wall. "You questioning me, Morrison, after everything I've done for you, everything we've built together? I'm questioning this vendetta." Skull replied, surprising strength in his voice. "It's destroying the club, Kane. Destroying you." Mac made his decision, stepping into the alley's entrance, pistol raised. "He's right, Kane. It's over. Your story's falling apart, and your men know it." Both men spun toward the new threat, Kane's hand moving to his waistband despite his injured shoulder. Skull froze, caught between opposing forces, loyalty warring with emerging doubt. You, Kane spat recognition and hatred twisting his features. Always turning up like a bad penny. Put your hands where I can see them. Mac ordered, weapon steady in his grip. Both of you. Skull complied, immediately combat experience, recognizing the authority in Mac's stance. Kane hesitated, calculation visible in his eyes as he assessed options, probabilities, potential outcomes. It's finished, Kane. Mac continued, advancing a step. Your men are in retreat. Tommy's people have secured the perimeter. Police are on their way. It's not finished until I say it's finished. Kane growled, desperation edging his voice. Not until you've paid for Jason, for everything you took from me. Jason died of leukemia, Mac said flatly, 6 months before our accident. The same disease that killed my daughter. The daughter you helped kill by redirecting her treatment resources. Skull's head snapped toward Kane's, shock evident in his expression. What is he talking about? What did you do? Kane's control slipped further, his facade cracking to reveal the broken man beneath. He's lying. They're all lying about Jason. My boy was in that car, was dying in that hospital while Sullivan ran like a coward. Show him the death certificate, Kane. Mac pressed, sensing the fracture points in Kane's carefully constructed reality. Show him the obituary dated months before the accident. Show him the truth you've been hiding from everyone, including yourself. Something dangerous flashed in Kane's eyes, the cornered animal preparing its final desperate attack. His hand moved with unexpected speed, producing a small revolver from beneath his jacket. Mac reacted instantly, combat reflexes taking over, but his target wasn't Kane. Instead, he launched himself towards Skull, tackling the larger man as Kane's weapon discharged. The bullet passed through the space Skull had occupied a split second earlier, embedding itself in the alley wall with a dull thud. The three men collapsed in a tangle of limbs, Kane's injured shoulder striking the ground with enough force to draw a cry of pain. The revolver skittered across the asphalt, sliding into shadow beyond immediate reach. Mac recovered first, rolling clear and regaining his feet with practiced efficiency. Skull followed more slowly, confusion and shock evident in his expression as he processed Kane's willingness to fire on him. His own second-in-command, his most loyal supporter. You shot at me, Skull said, disbelief coloring each word. You actually tried to kill me. Kane struggled to rise, pain and rage distorting his features. You betrayed me, questioned me in front of him. He gestured wildly toward Mac, hatred pouring from him in palpable waves. After everything, you take his side. There are no sides here, Kane. Mac interjected, retrieving his own weapon from where it had fallen during the struggle. Just truth and lies, and your lies are finally catching up to you. Skull's expression hardened as understanding dawned. Not just of Kane's immediate betrayal, but of the deeper deception that had defined their relationship for years. The others need to know, he said quietly, backing away from his former leader. The club needs to know what this has really been about. Morrison, Kane called as Skull turned to leave. Don't you walk away from me, don't you dare. But Skull continued without looking back, disappearing around the corner toward the main lot. Kane lunged after him, only to be halted by Mac's voice, cold and commanding. Stop right there, Kane. It's just us now, the way it should be. Kane froze, then slowly turned to face Mac. The veneer of control had vanished entirely, leaving only raw emotion in its wake. Grief and rage and desperation all mingled together, transforming his features into something barely recognizable as human. Why won't you just die? He whispered, the question containing all the incomprehension of a man whose world was collapsing around him. Why are you still standing when my son is gone? The question struck Mac with unexpected force, not because of its anger, but because of the genuine bewilderment beneath it. Kane truly couldn't understand why the universe had taken his child while leaving others to continue. It was the same question Mac had asked himself countless times after Sarah's death, the same cosmic injustice he'd struggled to accept. I don't know, Mac answered honestly. I ask myself the same thing every day. Why Sarah and not me? Why any child before their parent? There's no answer, Kane. No reason that makes sense of it. Something shifted in Kane's expression, a momentary clarity breaking through the madness, a flash of the man he might have been, before grief twisted him into something unrecognizable. Jason was everything. he said, voice suddenly small, stripped of its habitual menace. After he was diagnosed, I promised him I'd move heaven and earth to save him, that I'd never stop fighting. His gaze dropped to the ground, shoulders slumping in defeat. But I couldn't save him. No matter what I did, what I sacrificed, what I became, I couldn't save him. For the first time, Max saw Kane not as a monster, but as a mirror, a reflection of what he himself might have become had circumstances been slightly different. A father destroyed by loss, searching for meaning in a universe suddenly rendered meaningless by the absence of his child. I understand, Max said quietly, better than anyone. Kane looked up, momentary connection forming between them. Two men standing on opposite sides of the same abyss, recognizing themselves in each other's pain. Then Kane's expression hardened once more, resolve crystallizing in his eyes. No, he said, straightening despite his injured shoulder. You don't understand. You can't understand. Not until you've lost everything. Like I'm about to lose everything. His hand moved to his jacket again, producing not another weapon but a cell phone. You think this is over? You think you've won? A bitter laugh escaped him as he dialed, raising the phone to his ear. I still have one card to play, Sullivan. One final move. Mac tensed, instinct warning of danger beyond the immediate confrontation. What are you doing, Kane? Insurance policy? Kane replied, a terrible smile spreading across his face. I'm a careful man, Sullivan. Always have contingencies in place. The call connected, Kane's eyes never leaving Max as he spoke into the phone. It's me. Execute the backup plan. The lake house. Now. Horror dawned in Max's mind as understanding clicked into place. Elena and Lucia. He breathed ice, flooding his veins. You know where they are. Did you really think your friend's ex-brother-in-law wasn't on my payroll too? Kane's smile widened, satisfaction evident in his expression. Different jurisdiction, different arrangement, but money talks everywhere, Sullivan. And I've been spreading it around for years, preparing for exactly this moment. Max's weapon raised instinctively, finger tightening on the trigger, as rage threatened to overwhelm rational thought. Call them off, he demanded, voice deadly in its quiet intensity. Now, or what you'll kill me. Kane spread his arms in mocking invitation. Go ahead, but my men already have their orders. The woman and child die regardless. Time seemed to slow, options presenting themselves with crystalline clarity in Max's tactical awareness. He could shoot Kane, end the threat at its source, exact the vengeance that part of him still craved. But Kane was right. His death wouldn't save Elena and Lucia. Might even ensure their deaths if no countermanding order came. One chance, Mac offered, decision crystallizing within him. Call them off and you walk away from this. Disappear, you start over somewhere new. I won't pursue, you won't press charges for anything that's happened. Kane's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. You'd let me go after everything? To save them? Yes. The truth of it settled in Max's chest, heavy but certain. Their lives matter more than any vendetta, yours or mine. For a moment, Kane seemed to consider the offer, calculation visible in his eyes as he weighed options and outcomes. Then his expression hardened once more, resolution replacing uncertainty. Too late for deals, Sullivan. Too late for both of us. He gestured toward the phone still active in his hand. Make your choice. Kill me and guarantee their deaths, or try to save them and let me escape. Either way, I win something. Max's mind raced, seeking alternatives, angles, any solution that didn't involve impossible sacrifice. The radio at his belt suddenly crackled to life. Tommy's voice urgent through the static. Mac Kane's men are pulling out, retreating en masse. Something's happening. Understanding clicked into place with terrible clarity. Kane hadn't been bluffing. He'd already set his contingency plan in motion, redirecting his forces toward the lake house while creating this distraction at the truck stop. Mac made his decision in an instant, the choice both tactically sound and morally necessary. Tommy, he spoke into the radio, never taking his eyes from Kane. The safe house is compromised. Kane's men are headed there now. Elena and Lucia are in danger. Jesus, Tommy responded, comprehension evident in his voice. I'm on my way. What about you? Handling Kane, Mac replied tersely. Go, now. He lowered the weapon slightly, keeping it trained on Kane, but no longer aimed to kill. You're right about one thing, Kane. This does end tonight. Without warning, Mac lunged forward, closing the distance between them before Kane could react. Not shooting, something else entirely. The pistol's grip connected with Kane's temple in a precisely calculated strike, enough force to render unconscious, not enough to kill. Kane crumpled phone falling from limp fingers as he collapsed to the asphalt. Mac caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him with more care than the man deserved. The phone remained connected, a voice calling Kane's name from the small speaker. Mac retrieved it, raising it to his ear. "Kane can't come to the phone right now," he said, voice cold with purpose. "This is Sullivan." Silence greeted this announcement, then a cautious response. "What do you want?" "Call off the attack on the lake house," Mac ordered. "Kane's in custody. The death's head is finished in this territory. Anyone who approaches that safe house dies. Those are your options." Why should I believe you?" The voice challenged, though uncertainty had crept into its tone. "Because I'm giving you a chance." "Kane never would," Mac answered honestly. "A chance to walk away to live. Take it or don't. But understand what happens if you choose wrong." More silence this time, stretching longer, as the man on the other end weighed his limited options. Finally, a reluctant response. "All right, we'll stand down. But this isn't over, Sullivan." "Yes," Mac contradicted firmly. "It is." He ended the call, tucking the phone into his pocket as evidence. Kane remained unconscious at his feet, vulnerable in a way that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. Mac checked his pulse. Strong and steady, the man's body more resilient than his fractured mind. The sounds of conflict had faded around the truck stop, replaced by the approaching wail of police sirens. The authorities Kane had kept at bay through bribery and intimidation were finally responding, drawn by reports of gunfire and violence too significant to ignore. Mac knelt beside Kane's unconscious form, studying the face of the man who had haunted his existence for 3 years. Not a monster despite everything, just a man broken by grief, twisted by rage, unable to accept the fundamental unfairness at the heart of human existence. "I understand," Mac said quietly, though Kane couldn't hear him. "I really do, but it has to stop somewhere." He rose, retrieving both weapons and securing them as approaching headlights cut through the alley's darkness. Time for one final call, the most important of all. "Tommy," he spoke into the radio. "Status report. En route to the lake house." Tommy responded, immediately, engine noise audible in the background. 10 minutes out. Any word on Kane's men?" "Called off," Mac confirmed. "For now at least, but verify when you arrive. Trust nothing until you see Elena and Lucia safe with your own eyes." "Copy that. What about your situation?" Mac watched as police vehicles surrounded the truck stop, officers deploying with weapons drawn, establishing perimeter control. "Kane's down, contained? Police arriving now?" A pause, then Tommy's voice, concern evident despite the radio's distortion. "They'll take you in too, Mac. The accident, fleeing the scene, those charges don't go away just because Kane turned out to be the greater villain." "I know," Mac acknowledged, the weight of accountability settling around his shoulders. "Not as burden, but as choice freely made. It's time, Tommy. Time to stop running." "You sure about this? After everything you've done tonight, everything you've risked, you deserve better than a cell." Mac considered this gaze, traveling from Kane's unconscious form to the approaching officers, to the night sky above where stars were emerging in countless constellations. Somewhere in that vastness, he liked to think Sarah was watching, seeing her father finally become the man she'd always believed him to be. "What I deserve and what's right aren't always the same thing," he said finally. "Tell Elena. Tell her I kept my promise. I'm still alive. The rest will sort itself out." "I'll tell her," Tommy assured him. "And Mac, whatever happens next, you're not alone anymore. Remember that." Mac smiled slightly, the expression unfamiliar after years of grief and isolation. "I know. That makes all the difference." He set the radio down and raised his hands as officers approached, calling for him to surrender, to disarm. Mac complied without resistance, understanding that this moment represented not an ending, but a transition. From flight to confrontation, from evasion to acceptance. Kane had been right about one thing. Their stories were intertwined, their fates connected by tragedy and choice. But where Cain had descended into vengeance and madness, Mac had found his way back to something resembling redemption, not through escape, but through facing consequences directly. As handcuffs closed around his wrists, Mac felt an unexpected sensation spreading through his chest. Not fear or resignation, but something almost like peace. The peace of a man who had finally stopped running, who had stood his ground against both external threats and internal demons. Whatever came next, trial, imprisonment, eventual release, would be faced with the same resolve that had carried him through this night. Not alone, as Tommy had reminded him, but surrounded by a community forged in crisis, by connections that transcended circumstance, by Elena and Lucia, whose safety he had prioritized above his own freedom, by Tommy, whose loyalty had never wavered despite learning the worst of Mac's past, by the memory of Sarah, whose absence would always ache but no longer defined his entire existence. As Mac was led toward the waiting police car, dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon, the first tentative brushstrokes of a new day painting the desert sky. He watched its approach with clear eyes, no longer fearing what light might reveal about the man he had become. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Sullivan was exactly where he needed to be. Not running, not hiding, simply present, accountable, alive. It was enough. It had to be enough. And somehow, surprisingly, it was.